Hey Guy, today we're coming to Halloween, the day when children happily frolic in spooky costumes, trick-or-treat games, and sudden scares. Halloween is a shortened form of All Hallows Eve, the evening before All Saints' Day, a traditional festival held annually on October 31st, on the evening before All Saints' Day in Western Christianity. Listen to the whole story. If you enjoy it, please like, share and follow the channel to hear more great stories. And follow the summer. In the lands of the Celts more than 2,000 years ago, this was not simply a point of seasonal transition. It was a blurred boundary, a window in space-time where the lines between the living and the dead, light and darkness, old and new, grew fragile. The Celts called this moment Samhain, pronounced roughly Saich Win, which literally means end of summer. But in their mindset, it was the beginning of a new cycle, the start of the cold season, and the opening day of their traditional New Year. Samhain was not just a harvest festival, but also a liminal moment, when the normal order of the cosmos paused and extraordinary things could happen. They believed that then the veil, separating the world of the living and the world of the dead, grew thinner. The souls of the departed could cross more easily, and unseen powers could lurk nearby. The Celts observed Samhain with solemnity, tinged with quiet apprehension, not a chaotic fear, but a muted respect for death, transformation, and the uncontrollable. They kindled large fires on hilltops, burning logs to light the way and ward off spirits that might do harm. The soft crackle of flames mingled with the whispering wind. The tribal leaders, the Druids, held the central role in the rituals. They were both the intermediaries between humans and other realms, and the stewards of the world's balance. On the night of Samhain, people placed food, drink, and offerings outside their doors, or near the fire, as a way to remember ancestors and appease wandering souls, perhaps to ensure those souls caused no trouble, or, conversely, to receive protection from the shades that had just passed. The Celts also concealed themselves with costumes and masks, sometimes made of animal hides or heads, to deceive roaming spirits. If a spirit wandered among the living, at least it wouldn't recognise who was truly human. Time passed, and the world of the Celts met new influences, especially as the Roman Empire expanded its reach into their lands. During the period of domination, 2 Roman festivals fell near the time of Samhain and began to meld into local practice. Feralia, a day at the end of October when the Romans commemorated the dead, and the celebration honouring Pomona, the goddess of fruit and trees, Pomona's symbol being the apple. This blending may explain why today we see games like bobbing for apples, retrieving apples by mouth from a tub of water, an activity many believe is the lingering shadow of Pomona woven into the Samhain context. The Romans, in their own way, did not simply erase local traditions, they absorbed and assimilated them, causing the original Celtic festival to take on additional layers of nuance from both the remembrance of death and the fruit as a symbol of life. A beautiful contrast between beginnings and endings. And then, like every great culture, beliefs and practices continued to transform as Christianity spread across Europe. Around the 8th century, the Western Church under Pope Gregory III decided to set aside November 1st to honour the saints, expanding an existing festival, All Saints' Day, perhaps as a way to redirect the spiritual energy of pre-existing folk celebrations into a Christian framework. The evening before October 31st became All Hallows Eve, the Vigil of the Saints, and over time the phrase contracted into Halloween. Placing the Feast of Saints near Samhain can be seen as a strategy to absorb old beliefs, but it also reflects a natural continuity. Both are moments to remember what lies beyond the ordinary world, even if the perspective differs. One is ancestral or wandering spirits, the other is revered holy figures. However, when we tell a long-form story about origins, it's important to say plainly, not everything passed down through tradition is an unquestionable truth. Some modern scholars warn that certain connections commonly told between Samhain and supernatural elements, or the Christianization of a pagan festival, have even been exaggerated over time, sometimes becoming a form of contemporary mythology. Some scholars argue that Samhain originally, like many other harvest festivals around the world, was primarily meant to mark seasonal transitions and give voice to change, and that direct and explicit links to spirit calling or communing with the dead were sometimes later interpretations built on limited source material. The truth often lies among nuances. Beliefs about a thin boundary between worlds may have developed gradually, accreted over time by folkloric storytelling, seasonal anxieties, and the need to explain the unseen. Yet, in the consciousness of communities in Celtic lands, and across England, Scotland and Ireland, the images of New Year's Eve with blazing fires, masked figures, prayers and small gifts offered to appease or solicit protection became familiar. As Christianity gradually reshaped the belief framework of these regions, the old customs did not disappear. Instead, they assimilated, bent, were renamed, but persisted beneath the surface. All Hallows Eve became a moment in which people both honoured the saints and preserved something of that old opening circle, a night when things that seemed beyond control were regarded with both reverence and intimacy. In the Middle Ages, in England and the surrounding areas, some practices born from this blend began to take shape. Souling, the custom in which the poor went for soul cakes during All Hallowtide, October 31st to November 2nd. They went from house to house, singing prayers for the souls of the dead, and in return received soul cakes as an exchange, prayers for the departed in return for food for the living. In Scotland and Ireland, a tradition called guising emerged. Children dressed in costume, going door to door, performing a verse or dance, and being rewarded with food or money. These practices were not exactly the same as what we call trick or treat today, but they carried the same spirit. An exchange between the person at the door and the requester, combining disguise, words and gifts to keep peace on a night when the boundary between realms was felt more keenly. Stories about guising were not just children's pranks. Sometimes in a society where order and authority were tightly controlled, disguising oneself allowed a temporary concealment of identity, and the exchange in guising brought a warm sense of community, giver and receiver both taking part in a small ritual. Souling, on the other hand, evoked remembrance of the dead through prayer, a reflection of old traditions and new beliefs trying to coexist rather than clash outright. In the old Celtic countryside, people believed that if one wasn't careful, the tricks of spirits could escalate into calamity. Thus, dressing up was not only to deceive the fairies, but also a way to blend into the flow of the night, to endure it and temporarily become part of something larger than oneself. That is also why there are stories of lanterns made from hollowed-out turnips, with a candle inside to light the way and ward off darkness. In many regions, this lantern served both as protection and as a reminder of the boundary between light and shadow. Over time, in some places, turnips were gradually replaced by pumpkins, easier to carve and later becoming the familiar visual icon of Halloween in North America. Not everyone fully understood what was happening on the eve of November 1st. For many, it was an occasion to gather around the fire, to share food, to retell old stories. But for the children, for poor families, for those left behind in the churn of power and the new faith, that night was a vague intersection of hope and anxiety, of ritual and play, of protection and trial. This part of the story will bring you into those corners, through the telling of a child going guising, through the balancing act of a mother making soul cakes in exchange for prayers for her ancestors, and through the tense, warm, sometimes ambiguous dialogue between local lords and clerics, all to keep that special night alive in the heart of the community, even as the shadow of change slowly spreads. In a small village near the banks of the River Shannon, in Western Ireland, there was a girl named Aileen. That autumn, she had just turned 10. Her mother, Maeve, was contemplative, always remembering the rites that her mother and her grandmother had performed on Samhain Eve, not out of superstition, but as a way of saying, We do not forget those who came before. Maeve knew that now, with the church having extended its power. Practicing those entirely old-fashioned rites might make the villagers shrug or cast suspicious eyes, calling them too pagan. But she kept the small pieces. A bit of sage hung at the door to ward off ill spirits. A few soul cakes quietly set aside for her grandmother's spirit without announcing it aloud. Aileen grew up with the stories her mother whispered before sleep. On All Hallows Eve, souls wander. They seek light. They remember the smell of cakes. They hear singing. If you go souling, bring a word of thanks. Don't take too much, and always sing a prayer for those who have passed. On the afternoon of October 31st, as the sky began to wobble between golden light and mist, Aileen was dressed by her mother. Her grandmother's old cloak, a hat with a few ragged scraps sewn onto, hide her face, and a small basket holding soul cakes. Simple round cakes made from flour, eggs, milk, and a little sugar. On the top of each cake, her mother piped a cross in soft white icing, so it would be known that a prayer was coming with it. Aileen was not merely going to ask for cakes. In the village there was a tradition called souling. The poor or children went from door to door, requesting souls by singing a prayer tune or reciting a blessing. In return, the householder would give them a cake and promise that those who came after would say prayers for the souls of the dead in that household. It was a formal exchange, food taken in return for prayer, and the prayer preserving remembrance. Aileen was told carefully, "You must thank each householder, and when you sing, keep your voice warm. If they ask you about the dead, say, 'I sing for the souls of my grandfather and grandmother, so their prayers are not forgotten.'" As Aileen knocked on each door, the sound was like a small drum beat in the cool night. At the first house, the old woman of the house, who had once cared for Maeve when she was a child, opened the door with a gentle look. Aileen bowed her head, her voice quiet but clear. "Please accept this prayer and cake, so that the ancestral spirits of your family may be at peace." The old woman smiled, handed her another cake, and whispered, "Little one, don't forget to light a candle for your grandmother tonight. And remember, leave a bit of whiskey by the gate. The passing spirits will be hungry." At another house, a young man who had just returned from a distant funeral regarded Aileen with a solemn gaze. His son had died the previous spring. The man didn't say much, only offered 2 cakes and placed his hand on the girl's shoulder in a sharing touch. "Sing for the dead and don't fear the dark. They are only fragments of what once lived." Fergus's story in a village on the Scottish moor was slightly different. Fergus was the son of a blacksmith. His father knew much of the old beliefs, but also attended church, trying to keep both within bounds. In Fergus's village, there was a tradition called guising. Children disguised with scraps of cloth, faux skulls made from bark, or simply wearing rough wooden masks, then going house to house performing a verse, a little song, or a dance. In return, they received small coins, a piece of cheese, or sometimes a cake. Fergus always took pride in making people laugh with the half-whispered tales he invented, like saying that the night before his brothers had slept with the axe under their pillows to drive away evil, or that a little demon would blow out the hearth fire if they didn't leave some milk out for it. He had learned guising verses from an older friend, and that year he wrote a chorus of his own. "On All Hallows Eve, I come here, disguised like the quiet winds sweep. Give me a bit of cake. Let the soul rest, I sing. I dance. Please don't forget." When Fergus arrived at the house of the laird, the local lord, a man whose eyes had seen many harsh winters, he sang loudly and cheerfully. The laird gave a thin smile, handed over a coin, and then said to Fergus, "Boy, next year you'll have many following. Keep the merriment, but remember, don't let the play cross the line. The living still have work to do tomorrow." Behind those games lay a fragile balance. The lords needed to keep peace in the village, not be drawn into conflict between supporters of the old beliefs and the new clerics. Some lords subtly used the occasion of Halloween to reinforce their authority. They permitted children to go guising through the village, but in return demanded a small fee, a few morsels of food, or a prayer for the dead in their household, to signal themselves as guardians of both tradition and order. That night Fergus returned home with the coin in his pocket and a smile. But his father looked deep into his eyes, both proud and uneasy. "You kept your promise, but don't let it become the reason others use you as a symbol." Meanwhile, in another village, the priest of the small church tied to the nearby abbey was facing a question. How to soften the folk customs he knew sometimes carried pagan roots, while still maintaining the villagers' trust. His name was Father Eamon, a man who had once been the bookish youth in the abbey library and had reflected deeply on the intersection of orthodox faith and popular belief. He did not want to wipe out the rites of Samhain and guising outright. He understood that those traditions provided a sense of connection, and if brutally banned, they would only retreat into darkness, breeding conflict and suspicion. So Father Eamon did what he called a redirection. He encouraged families to come to the church on the eve of All Saints to light candles for the souls, while holding a modest gathering with brief prayers and songs adapted from old folk tunes. He advised the children going guising to sing blessings, instead of the older, fear-tinged verses. He called it a renaming of what already existed. "We do not take away the roots," he whispered in a small sermon. "We only help them grow in a direction where the light can take deeper hold." Many in the village accepted it as a safe loophole. They still let the children go guising, but beforehand they gave Father Eamon a soul cake for him to bless. Some quietly retained older pieces. A few families still hung sage at windows, and some elderly women whispered stories of shapes lurking beyond the fields when there was no moonlight. Not everyone agreed. There were some newcomers to the village, carrying edicts from magistrates or from the diocese that all things unfit must be driven back. They saw guising as an outlet for uncontrolled forces, and Father Eamon's brief prayers were dismissed as half-measures. They went to the Lord, urging him to impose clear rules, ban disguises, ban the old-style soul-asking, ban causing trouble, because that is the work of the devil. The laird in Fergus's village, a man who had lived through famine and understood the villagers' bonds, simply listened, then said, "If you ban it, you'll see people do it secretly. If you understand, you can make them see that what they believe in can be done better. That is our power, making people think they're preserving, not controlling." Elsewhere, a guising musk was kept as a keepsake. Mairead, Aileen's younger sister, was not yet old enough that year to go souling, but she lay listening to her sister's story and memorised every detail. When Eileen returned, she told her, "We went to the cleric's house. He laid his hand on the cake and prayed. He said that people could sing to remember the saints and also remember the ancestors. He gave me a ribbon hairpin to bring back for you, saying Mairead would be allowed to join next year." Mairead hid the hairpin beneath her pillow and went to sleep, dreaming of a faint cloud of light guiding the souls home. A dream her mother did not dare question too deeply, for she knew the dream carried both the words of the old and the gentle promises of the new. The hearts of those villages were full of such small stories. The joy of a child receiving a coin, the thoughtful look of a mother recalling her dead husband, laughter that sometimes broke like firelight, and cautious glances when someone passed wearing a mask, not only to fool the spirits, but to say, "I too belong to this night." The community held itself together with rituals, with compromises, with stories passed mouth to mouth. In a small meeting beneath the ancient oak, where the elders and the Lord usually gathered after an autumn afternoon, there was a brief exchange between Father Eamon and an old woman who had once been the village's chief storyteller, named Grania. Grania had preserved the legends of Samhain when her generation was young, and she knew the times were shifting. "You want to bring light into the dark places," she said. "But does that light take away the shadow of those who came before?" Father Eamon looked her straight in the eye. "I do not want to erase the shadow. I only want to show them that they can stand in the light without losing the sense of the night." Grania was silent for a moment. Finally she nodded. "Then let me tell one more story. Let the stories be spoken on the church steps. Tonight I will tell of wandering souls finding their way home. And you will add a prayer for them, so they hear the new name and do not forget the old one. It was the fragile merging of an age. The old strange marks were not wholly erased, but repainted with a fresh coat so they would not be seen as defiance. The children kept going guising, sometimes unaware that the playful rite they took part in had its roots in beliefs about the boundary between life and death, and in the necessity of keeping peace when souls seemed near. They did not leave their homeland because they wanted to. Maeve's family, now grown with a little daughter named Ide, along with her younger brother Seamus, chose to go. The fields in Ireland had been cut down by hunger and disease. The voices of neighbours who once laughed had grown thin. News of the Great Potato Famine, the massive famine caused by blight-destroying crops in the 1844, had ushered in a wave of people seeking a new start across the ocean. They carried wooden chests, a few changes of clothes, and fragile scraps of memory of Samhain nights, guising, souling, and hollowed-out turnip lanterns, with candlelight flickering through masked faces. As the ship bobbed on the Atlantic and left Cork Harbour in late autumn, Maeve held a small guising mask in her hand, and Aileen, now a young maiden, whispered to Ida an old song. On All Hallows Eve, don't forget to light candles. Passing souls, let them see that they are remembered. Those words were a thin thread binding them to their old home, stretched between the wide sea and an uncertain future. They arrived at an eastern US port in 1847, part of the wave of Irish fleeing starvation. Others carried with them the sound of Gaelic, the smell of dried tobacco, and occasionally old blessings for the safety of souls. In the new neighbourhood where they settled, a small group of Scots and some English, who had lived there for years, also lived. People who likewise bore the remnants of guising, the costumed play that once existed as a liminal moment, but was no longer called by its old name. A new language came day by day, but the night of October 31st still could make the old ones recall those thin nights before. They met, shared soul cakes, sang the verses again, and gradually realised that although they came from different corners of Europe, there was something shared in how they used this night to remember, to protect, and to temporarily impersonate, to disguise, to decode the boundary between what was lost and what was trying to live on. Ide remembered clearly the first time she used a pumpkin, something never seen in Ireland in that way, to carve a face, light a candle inside, and place it on the doorstep. Back home they used turnips, potatoes, or mangel-wurzel to make what was called a jack-o'-lantern, based on the folktale of Stingy Jack, who was condemned to wander between worlds with a coal trapped inside a hollowed-out turnip, that light being the sign of a restless soul with no resting place. Maeve told that story to Ida in Gaelic mixed with a few new English words she had learned, and Seamus pointed out that here they have bigger plants, softer to carve. They found large pumpkins, easier to hollow than hard turnips, and that night they tried the substitution. The light from the pumpkin glowed warm and golden, unlike the cold, dry sparkle of the turnip, and Ede felt as if there were a new kind of spirit, not that of any specific dead person, but a continuation. This lantern will protect us, like Mother protected us in the old stories. Their first autumns in America were not like Samhain back in Ireland. In the neighbourhood where they lived, Halloween was not a clearly named big day. It was a small immigrant community gathering, blended with other things. Mischief Night, the night before Halloween, where mild pranks appeared in some areas, sometimes the leftover of old revelry, sometimes a reminder that the thin boundary could make people act out in mischief to express themselves. The Scots and Irish brought their guising and souling habits, but in the new environment it transformed. Language shifted, guising drifted into mixed names, and the act of going for became a friendly exchange between children and neighbours. The original form of trick or treat was not yet strong enough to have a fixed name, but phrases like trick or a treat began to appear in other parts of North America, especially in Canada in the early 20th century. gradually spreading into the United States in the 1930s. Seamus, who had a slow heart and a keen eye, began to notice the change in how the local children participated. One October night, he led Ede and Eileen to a street where American children of English descent were staging a small light intimidation. They dressed up as odd characters, knocked on neighbours' doors, and demanded a treat with gentle teasing. If nothing was given, it might be a paper flower tossed against a window or a stifled giggle from behind. Ida, holding to what her mother taught her, softly lifted her voice to sing a blessing in Gaelic mixed with English, and in return received small candies, a piece of cake, and a curious look. "What are we doing?" A nearby mother whispered to her own child. "Those are the newcomers. They have their own ways, but we give them a little candy so they feel safe." Those were the first times where unclear names, old rites coated in loosely held new ceremony, and the belief that if we give, we are remembered, still survived in some form. Time went on, and Halloween in the new country began to take on a shape of its own. By the end of the 19th century, local newspapers and magazines started printing stories about Halloween night, op-eds advising against over-the-top mischief, but also pieces about costume parties and autumn festivals that families held to gather the community. The mixture of old traditions and American habits produced a version many regarded as safer. Children were encouraged to dress up, not to full spirits, but to attend gatherings, play games, receive candy from neighbours, and adults threw themed parties with spooky trappings. In many communities, especially as mass culture spread, Halloween became contested. Some worried about its pagan origins, others stayed wary of pranks, but many more saw it as an opportunity to build cohesion, particularly in new neighbourhoods where differences of origin could easily create fractures. Maeve's family had no intention of turning what they carried with them into something grand. At first, they kept the core, the story of Stingy Jack retold beside the pumpkin lantern set under the eaves, soul cakes shared with neighbours, and a few children hiding in the neighbourhood listening, then growing up naturally continuing by dressing up, knocking on doors, and asking for something, sometimes just a piece of candy, sometimes a blessing. Ida began to write things down. She would tell her future daughter how they blended the old songs in Gaelic with the new-sounding greetings of Happy Halloween. Aileen quietly exhaled when she heard another child ask, "Why dress up?" And she answered, "To remember that we once hid ourselves from wandering spirits, and now to laugh with them." The spread did not come only from the immigrants. When Native American children and the children of other newcomers saw the laughter, the pumpkin lanterns glowing through the mist, they wanted to take part as well. Some families of German origin brought other autumnal traditions, like harvest festivals and similar games, and they sometimes merged, creating a Halloween that was not just a Celtic memory, but stratified by waves of migration. Gradually, the name trick or treat began to take form. From Canada, it spread into the border regions of the United States, spoken by children as a simple phrase, trick or treat. Not so much a threat as part of the social exchange. If a house had nothing to give, there might be a mild prank. If there was a treat, then laughter and well wishes would fill the night. There were moments of smouldering tension. Some adults worried that the children were bringing back the mischief of the past, because part of the guising souling tradition had been tied to hiding identity. So in the early 20th century, some communities began staging safe Halloweens under supervision. Parades, school parties, or meetings at lodges to prescribe proper ways to dress up and ask for treats, as a way to transform chaos into something manageable. Communities, including people like Seamus, who had quietly thought that if they didn't adapt, the old things would be misconstrued as rebellion, began to see that legitimising the form of guising into trick or treat could lessen division and increase connection between newcomers and old residents. On the night of October 31st, 1920, in a small town in the northern United States, Ede led a group of children, some kin, some new friends, down the cobbled streets. They wore homemade clothes, some patched, some glinting with scraps of old fabric, and sang, now mixed with common English, Trick or treat, please give me something good to eat. A householder, seeing their bright smiles, gave each of them a candy bar and a small piece of bread. Ida remembered Eileen's laughter in the dark as they walked home, saying, "They didn't ask why I sang, they just answered with candy." That small story began to spread among neighbours, then became something to be done. The next year, many other groups of children joined, and trick or treat began to take shape as a fixed part of the night. In the years that followed, as world wars and social change arrived, Halloween kept evolving. Wartime shortages made giving out candy difficult. But immediately after the wars ended and civilian life expanded, especially in the new suburbs rising after World War II, trick or treat exploded as part of post-war children's culture. The amount of candy, the sense of safety in neighbourhoods, and the idea of going to ask for gifts became widely popular. And from there, pumpkin lanterns, the story of Stingy Jack and dressing up were no longer merely isolated traditions of immigrant communities. They spread nationwide, becoming part of a newly named thing, Halloween. As the pieces of Halloween, glowing pumpkin lanterns, children draped in strange costumes, and the loose phrase trick or treat began to appear in the new neighbourhoods of North America, there was no single straight line leading to the form we know today. Instead, it was a chain of adaptations, mild conflicts, community reframings, and a bit of chaos, all unfolding against the background noise of a society in transition. From early 20th century immigrant folk festivals, through youthful making a racket mischief, to deliberate efforts to contain it into a safe and connective celebration. The story began with a simple phrase that not everyone immediately understood: trick or treat. The phrase was first recorded in print not in the United States, but in Canada in the early 1920s, in articles describing children knocking on doors, asking for candy, or demanding something in a half-threatening, half-joking way. From there it spread into northern United States, where immigrant communities from Ireland, Scotland, England, and others brought souling and guising traditions and began to mix them with local character. Children going to ask for gifts was not always initially a benign act. In the 1920s, many places still intertwined it with sly pranks, both a legacy of anonymity and a reaction when the boundary between social order and disruption was thin. Alongside the spread of the trick-or-treat idea, another side of Halloween slowly rose: mischief, from soiling, smashing windows, to more extreme acts like vandalism. In the early 20th century, especially in the decades immediately before and after World War I, Halloween in many places was not just a night of candy and cosy costumes, but sometimes resembled a public challenge. Children and teens, with blurred lines between prank and vandalism, engaged in disruptive behaviour like tipping over trash cans, loosening clocks, pasting flyers, even ransacking vacant houses. Some towns and suburbs were so concerned they considered outright bans on Halloween activities as too dangerous. Control efforts came from both local authorities and family councils, organising supervised costume events, encouraging children to go only to familiar houses, and creating a legitimate trick-or-treat framework to reduce chaos. There were times when newspapers ran warnings about dangerous Halloweens, describing major acts of mischief, and urging communities to shift from vandalism towards collective parties. In that context, many communities began a subtle redirection. Instead of trying to extinguish the old customs entirely, which often produced covert backlash, they sought to reframe them. Much like Father Eamon in the small village across the ocean had done earlier, some community leaders in the US and Canada encouraged keeping the spirit of Halloween, but making it nicer, staging costumed parades, spooky-themed school parties, and urging children to go asking in supervised forms. Local newspapers printed pieces with advice like, "Don't let Halloween night turn into vandalism. Let children dress up and attend the festival at the lodge." And parent-teacher or church-affiliated associations organised safe Halloweens to involve entire families. This didn't just reduce conflict, it created a new kind of ritual where people did Halloween the right way, preserving the fun while trimming the chaos. At the same time, the imagery and symbols of Halloween began to coalesce. In the early 20th century, Halloween costumes were still largely homemade, leaning into eerie, supernatural themes more than modern characters: witches, skeletons, ghosts, demons, and legendary figures. Black and white photos from the 1910s and 1920s show families in self-sewn outfits, sometimes using paper, old cloth, or crude masks to differentiate themselves. By the 1930s, as industry began to see potential, the first commercially sold costumes appeared, making dressing up less wholly dependent on personal craft. The emergence of costume shops and the influence of mass culture, especially as imagery from film and later television spread, shifted Halloween dress from vague spookiness to specific characters, bringing a fresh novelty to children and adults alike. Against that backdrop of reinvention, the jack-o'-lantern had its own journey. The story of Stingy Jack, who tricked the devil and was condemned to wander with a coal trapped inside a hollowed-out turnip, travelled with immigrants from Ireland, carrying both fear and wry humour. Back home, turnips or mangel wurzel were traditional carving materials because they were hard and held embers well. In North America, people quickly discovered pumpkins, larger, softer, easier to carve, and giving a warmer light, becoming the new canvas for the lanterns. Gradually, these lanterns came to signify more than warding off wandering spirits. Someone placing a jack-o'-lantern on their porch was telling the night, "I know this night is special, and I keep that safe." The tale of Stingy Jack was softly retold each autumn, not merely to recount the cunning of a trickster, but to remind that light in the dark is a connection between past and present. These changes did not occur uniformly. In some small towns, older generations still kept the nostalgia of the Night of Souls with seriousness. Jack-o'-lanterns placed to hold the way for spirits and preserve a sense of the sacred, while children elsewhere saw them simply as whimsical lanterns. Meanwhile, the press began printing Halloween guides, from how to sew costumes to appropriate party games, to how to prevent children from acting up, turning Halloween into a set of transmitted motions: dress up, go ask or attend a party, eat candy, laugh, then clean up. A new generation grew up between old precedents and new structures. They understood that going to her ask was normal, but also heard the talk of, if nothing's given, you'll be played. And most of the time they didn't know that some of those conventions rooted back to ancient Samhain rites, or were community responses to social instability. Even as Halloween was gradually whitened out of its original chaos in many places, waves of reaction surfaced. There were years when some regions confronted skepticism. Did encouraging costumes and asking for treats foster selfishness, or promote begging? Some religious organisations and parents tried to adjust by emphasising communal aspects: give candy to the poor, take it home and share, or organising charity Halloweens where children traded costumes for helping the elderly. These changes were part of legitimation, making Halloween more acceptable to a rising middle class while preserving its artful side. A way of turning a night of uncertainty into a ritual that could be shaped and giving it a sense of safety. Thus, Chapter 2 opens with a divergence. From the chaotic darkness of mischief and folk mystery, Halloween was gradually framed into community activities, while its symbols, costumes, jack-o'-lanterns, the phrase trick or treat, became familiar yet retained echoes of their deep origins. People no longer simply dressed up to fool spirits, but dressed up to connect, to ask for treats, to laugh together, to not vandalise. And within that laughter reverberated a long history, from Samhain through All Hallows Eve to the early 20th century nights in the US and Canada, where new generations taught themselves how to preserve and revise tradition. Threshold, trick or treat, and the vague symbols of Halloween were taking shape, while communities sought to reframe the old into the new. Now we dive deeper into how costuming became specific, how it shifted from homemade, vague, spooky disguises into choices that were personal, commercial, and heavily influenced by mass culture. and how trick or treat, from a scattered practice, spread throughout American society via media, suburbs, and the continual remaking of the festival's own imagery. In the early 20th century, Halloween costuming in the US and Canada was still primarily do-it-yourself. People used scraps of cloth, folded paper, cardboard masks, or simple veils to impersonate ghosts, witches, skeletons, images that carried the iconography of traditional fear. It was a primal kind of disguise, to tease, to ward off, to hide temporarily, sometimes to perform a trick if no treat was given. But as print industry, mass production, and commercialization expanded, Halloween began to turn. Costumes were no longer solely the handiwork of each family. They became goods one could buy. The 1930s marked the first appearance of mass-marketed Halloween costumes, often made from cheap materials like crepe paper, synthetic fabric, and easily produced moulded details. Manufacturers began to recognise the extended potential of autumn as a small consumer season, an occasion to sell decorations, costumes, and distinctive snack items. In advertisements and family magazines of the time, Halloween was presented not merely as a spooky night, but as an opportunity for children to dress as beloved characters without having to sew them themselves, making participation easier while minimising the chaotic mischief by offering controlled, polished templates. The emergence of commercial costumes made Halloween's visual identity more consistent, while simultaneously opening space for new personalisation. You were no longer just a generic ghost, but could impersonate a specific character from stories, film, comics. And from there, mass culture began to imprint itself on costume choices. As cinema and later television entered American homes, on-screen characters, from Dracula and Frankenstein to superheroes like Superman or Hollywood figures, became models borrowed for Halloween outfits. That shift didn't happen overnight. It was the result of mass media supplying images, narratives, and a shared memory that children and their parents could relate to and want to perform. In the post-World War II era, as suburbs boomed and middle-class family lifestyles spread, Halloween tapped into that moment as a fresh explosion. A child growing up in a 1950s suburb might see trick-or-treating on television. Encounter it in family shows like Ozzie and Harriet, in illustrations in children's magazines, or through Walt Disney cartoons, e.g. the 1952 short Trick or Treat. And it immediately gained legitimacy, not merely a local custom, but a must-do of the season. That saturation, combined with the lifting of wartime sugar rationing and the increasing safety of suburban neighbourhoods for children to roam, made Halloween a fixed part of family calendars. New costumes, sometimes store-bought, seasonal candy, and supervised nights of going door to door. Trick-or-treats spread through mass culture in two directions. As depicted imagery, in film, radio programmes, later television, and as social advice, local papers publishing safe Halloween guides. By the late 1940s and early 1950s, radio shows like The Jack Benny Show or animated shorts presented scenes of children asking for treats, making the practice feel normal, even a civilised part of family life. As those images were replayed, children in unfamiliar areas began to imitate, and local communities used similar elements to organise safe Halloweens, parades, costume contests, candy distributions at lodges, to rein in the previous chaos. A key pivot in this phase was the genuine shift of costuming from generic spookiness to specific characters. People no longer dressed merely to hide or symbolise the supernatural, but to parody, honour, or sometimes satirise figures elevated by media. Superheroes, horror film characters, TV personalities, even cultural icons, creating a new identity journey in childhood, where a child chose who they wanted to be, not just for play, but to express taste and gain recognition from peers. As consumer culture grew, the Halloween market expanded beyond children. Adults began to participate. In the 1960s and 1970s, as cultural lenses shifted alongside social movements, Halloween gradually added adult parties, where costuming was no longer limited to spooky figures, but began reflecting social trends. Gender plays, rebellion, and later the sexy costume phenomenon, emerging near the end of the 20th century as an expression of shifting norms. By the 1980s, adult Halloween parties were commercialised, themed, and influenced by both television and advertising, extending Halloween from a children's festival into a multi-layered autumn cultural phenomenon. However, commercialisation was not always smooth. The boom in Halloween products also provoked pushback. Some saw Halloween as being pasted onto consumer templates, losing its original community core. There were concerns that children accustomed to asking for candy forgot the shared meaning of giving, or that parents turned Halloween into a competition of whose costume is most extravagant. In response, some communities reinvented initiatives. Charity Halloweens. Children trade costumes for helping the elderly. Educational Halloweens. Integrating history community lessons into the celebration. Or collective parades to foster connection rather than excessive individualization. In this period, fixed symbols like the jack-o'-lantern continued evolving. No longer merely a light against darkness, it became an active autumn decoration, sold ready-made, placed on porches, posed within photos, even a prop in family-oriented, cozy Halloween advertisements. The standardization of that imagery made Halloween instantly recognizable, even as other details shifted. Pumpkin glow, children carrying treat bags through the neighborhood, and costumes evoking personal identity while being tied into a broader historical chain few articulate. In the new suburbs, where paved streets cut between green lawns and uniformly styled houses, Halloween became a reunion night. People established sensible trick-or-treat routes, parent clubs supervised, children knew what to wear, whom to go with, and which houses to stop at. Safety seemed enforced by social convention, and that again altered the nature of the festival. From old communal ambiguity into a shaped, orderly ritual that still preserved the wonder of giving and asking. To summarise this section, Halloween costuming was no longer a vague cloth veil or crude homemade mask hiding ancient identity. It had become an interaction between individual and mass culture, between tradition and market, and between pure childhood delight and post-war societal regulation. Trick-or-treat spread was adopted and normalised not just by word of mouth but through images on screens, in newspapers, and on candy boxes with printed instructions. Halloween began to look layered, familiar yet constantly updated, both product and ritual. Halloween night, which had once been a tangled mix of folk ritual, prank, and the anonymity of guising, saw a clear transformation in the 1960s through the 1980s, from a scattered local custom into a mass phenomenon with structure, imagery, and market, while still retaining old tensions between commercialisation and tradition, between defined safety and the weird that could not be fully domesticated. In the expanding post-World War II American suburbs, Halloween was no longer just sporadic going for candy. It became part of the family autumn schedule, a night when porch lights came on, costumed children were guided along safe trick-or-treat routes, and parents could see that image reflected back on television. The power of mass media at that moment was a catalyst. Family TV shows, cartoons, radio, and then evening television repeatedly replayed those images. A child wearing a witch's hat, carrying a candy bag, knocking on a neighbour's door and saying trick or treat. Scenes like that appeared in popular programming, fall-themed cartoons or family shows like Ozzie and Harriet, making participation in Halloween not only accepted, but expected. Going for candy suddenly became part of civilised family autumn life. Alongside being shaped on screen, Halloween began to develop a distinct ancillary industry. The 1960s marked the era when Ben Cooper Inc. dominated the Halloween costume market, holding some 70-80% of it. They put images from film, television, and cultural figures onto easily purchased, easy-to-wear outfits, making costuming visually uniform, while also enabling a kind of collective identification. From Catwoman on the small screen, the tight black look of Batman 1966, to the prominent Wonder Woman of the 1970s, Halloween began to reflect cultural trends. Children no longer just dressed as generic ghosts, but as characters they knew from the screen. Commercialization did not stop at costumes. Symbols like the jack-o'-lantern were pulled out of the realm of a lantern to ward off wandering spirits, and turned into mass decorative elements, sold ready-made, placed on porches, featured in family photos, appearing in cozy Halloween season advertisements, showing a reunited family by the pumpkin light. Companies targeting this small holiday season published Halloween guides, from how to make decorations, choose costumes, to how to host Halloween the right way, turning what had once been a loose tradition into something structured and consumable. Halloween was framed. There was a formula for fun, measures to limit the mischief, which had previously been an inseparable component, and ways to keep the night safe while still feeling sufficiently strange. However, that safety did not arrive without echoes of older anxieties. As Halloween gradually became a codified family ritual, children following defined routes, parents supervising, communities organising parades and safe Halloween parties, a soft backlash appeared. Some felt it squeezed out the spontaneous spookiness, the uncontrolled core of the original experience, making Halloween too neatly framed and stripping away the vitality of uncertainty. At the same time, others remained wary of the wild edge. Memories of mischief lingered. Trick or treat was misunderstood as begging from a conservative viewpoint, and debates arose over whether the tradition had been over-commercialised. So within families and communities, careful small negotiations took place. Some elders retained the old storytelling, recounting the origin of the jack-o'-lantern from Stingy Jack in hushed tones around the light, saying the glow was a message between generations, and telling children that going for treats should come with a thank you, not just taking. But the child growing up in suburbia, seeing Halloween on television, wearing a store-bought character costume, receiving candy in a paper bag with a logo, learned that this was a night for controlled fun, where the old mixed with the new quietly. Another strand of transformation was the emergence and popularisation of haunted houses and controlled horror experiences. From the late 1960s into the early 1970s, amusement parks like Knott's Berry Farm launched Halloween entertainment horror events. Knott's Scary Farm began in 1973, and Disneyland opened the Haunted Mansion in 1969, placing beautified fear at the centre of Halloween culture. Not genuine panic, but a directed, scripted experience that was thrilling without truly threatening. At the same time, community organisations, for example non-profit haunted houses that began in Ohio in 1970, used the concept for fundraising or collective events, adding a layer of horror as community activity to Halloween. Parallel to that, there were mirrored and opposing versions. Conservative evangelical groups began producing hell houses in the early 1970s, horror tropes repurposed in moralistic contexts, intended to warn about sin and the afterlife. That was a quiet dialogue between the popular entertainment spooky and the ideological moral panic. Halloween was not just laughter and candy, but also a contest over meaning, who controlled the imagery and who steered the spiritual tone of the night. Changes in approach were also tied to the growth of consumer culture and brand loyalty. Halloween gradually became more than a single evening. It was a standardised sequence of behaviours. Buy a new costume this year, plan the party, purchase assorted candy, decorate the porch, and take a cheerful family photo to send as a card or preserve as memory. Small businesses sprang up supplying ideas, goods, and all-in-one Halloween packages. On the other side, tradition-minded preservationists tried to keep the soul of the night, organising charity Halloweens, encouraging sharing candy with the poor, reconciling commercial elements by framing it as giving rather than buying, And like all cultural change, the synchronization was uneven. In small rural areas, Halloween could still appear with nostalgic tones. Children sewing their own outfits, mothers making candy in the kitchen, old stories told under yellow streetlights. While in large cities, people saw it in TV commercials, supermarket signage, and in elaborate youth-organised festivals. Some elders complained that now Halloween is just commerce, but many younger people saw it as a way to connect, from choosing a costume that reflected personal taste to sharing photos in a Halloween album, making the festival both deeply personal and newly collective. The story now begins to spread beyond the borders where it was stitched together, from a folk festival of the Celts, reshaped through layers of Christianity and migration, then becoming a distinctly North American Halloween, and then from there, like a persistent ripple, it radiates back out to the rest of the world. There is no single map showing that path. It is a network of contacts, collisions, adaptations, and sometimes resistance, where theatrical films, television shows, international retail chains, soldiers stationed abroad, travel, and later the internet form the mechanisms exporting a festival that can be reread in many ways. By the mid-20th century, as Hollywood reels extended outward and family television programs appeared in living rooms around the globe, the image of costumed children knocking on doors, shiny treat bags, jack-o'-lanterns glowing on windowsills, all became familiar, even to those who had never heard clearly of Samhain or All Hallows' Eve. People saw Halloween on screen, then imitated it at parties, in shopping centres, or simply bought a mask and tried it on to taste the just right strangeness the festival offered. In many European cities that once had analogous older festivals, like in England, Ireland, or Scotland, the American version of Halloween was in part a revival filtered through modernity. Ready-made costumes, bright pumpkin lights, and going for treats becoming a cheerful activity rather than a rite or warning. But elsewhere, where Halloween had not been part of the tradition, it appeared as a new echo, something foreign, borrowable, and transformable, sometimes embraced, sometimes viewed warily. In some European countries, where the roots of Samhain lingered in folk memory but had lain dormant for centuries, the re-imported Halloween carried ambivalence, both a vague, nostalgic sense of the old and a new style from outside. In France, Germany, the Netherlands, and elsewhere, shopping centres began hanging orange lights, selling pumpkin-themed decorations, and promoting costume gatherings, while many families maintained a balanced view. It's just a bit of autumn fun. It doesn't replace our own religious observances. In England, where Halloween had at times been diminished as All Hallows' Eve blended into other, more normative occasions, American influence helped revive it. Children going for candy, school costume parties, a mixture of local tradition and popular imagery. Somewhere people rechristened what had been, something that had once been an autumn night event, with spiritual overtones now carried the hues of family shopping, of a fun night, and of Halloween photos. For cultures without a precedent of Halloween in their traditional memory, adoption often occurred indirectly, through film and advertising, horror movies, autumn cartoons, foreign TV shows, then into malls and global brands. In Japan, as early as the late 20th century, the image of Halloween was imported not as a straight copy, but as a canvas for distinct expression. Initially, small costume events appeared in major commercial districts. Halloween parties were held in cosplay style, people choosing a wide array of characters, sometimes demons, sometimes anime figures, and decorations leaning cute rather than frightening. Streets like Shibuya turned Halloween night into a street festival where thousands gathered in outfits showcasing individual creativity, less trick-or-treat, and more visual performance, where people joyfully became someone different for one night. Here, Halloween met kawaii culture, character celebration, and urban rhythm, and became a new experience while retaining the sense of an unusual night in a frame not heavily religious. Similarly, in South Korea, large malls and entertainment districts began embracing the Halloween season as an opportunity for costume festivals with a quirky fashion spirit. It was not a straight replication of trick or treat, but using dressing up as collective entertainment, influenced in part by American media, interwoven with music, lighting, and youth events. There, Halloween sometimes attached to photo sessions and friend gatherings instead of gift-seeking rituals, and symbols like masks, bright outfits, and jack-o'-lanterns were integrated into a youthful autumn context. In the Southern Hemisphere and Latin countries, Halloween met existing festivals of remembrance, creating interesting intersections. In Mexico, where Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, is a deeply spiritual ritual honouring ancestors, Halloween arrived in part through media influence and tourism, sometimes placed beside it, sometimes blended. Calavera skull masks of Dia de los Muertos were seen alongside orange and black Halloween decor in large urban areas. Some families kept the distinction, one side a profound ancestral commemoration, the other a fun American-style night. But there were also interwoven spaces where symbols coexisted in the same autumn setting to both honour and create new, experiential frames for visitors and younger generations. In Brazil, Halloween, sometimes called Dia das Bruxas, Witches' Day, was introduced via film and imported goods, then adapted locally. Costume parties, vivid decorations, occasionally mixing with a local fondness for the mysterious, but in a more festive tone. Not everywhere accepted it unreservedly. In many societies, the rise of Halloween in its Americanized form led some groups to view it as cultural encroachment, an imported festival, overlaying older traditions, blurring local rites, or turning autumn into a new consumer wave. Some countries responded with preservationist impulses, promoting native festivals instead of imitation. There were efforts to contextualize Halloween on its own terms, organising treating in ways that honoured local community, or transforming costumes into ethnic expressions with colours and styles of disguise better aligned with that identity, maintaining a careful distance between new and old. In some regions, global spread was furthered by small but potent vectors, soldiers stationed abroad sending candy bags home, multinational confectionery brands displaying Halloween season products in unfamiliar city supermarkets, and later in the closing decades of the century, social media amplifying the imagery, videos of DIY costumes, trick-or-treat in different cities, brilliantly lit jack-o'-lanterns shared widely, making the sense that Halloween is coming, part of the autumn cycle even for those who had never known it before. In a small city in Central Europe, where there had once been local folk festivals honouring the dead, Halloween arrived like a strange breeze. There was laughter, orange light, but also caution. A group of local young people decided not just to ride the trend, but to turn Halloween into a combined autumn festival. An evening with booths displaying jack-o'-lanterns, alongside tables for lighting candles in remembrance of ancestors. Children were encouraged to dress as figures from local legend, rather than just imported witches or skeletons. And costume contests were expanded into autumn storytelling, each outfit becoming a story about a local hero, a remembered spirit, or an old event retold with a new tune. The organisers called it Our Halloween, not erasing American influence, but placing it beside what had always existed, so no one forgot that autumn could be both joyful and quietly reflective. In another city, where religious tradition was stronger, Halloween was initially seen as an import and somewhat invasive. Cultural veterans in the community proposed a balance point. Instead of outright banning it, they created a separate event around the same time called the Autumn Light Night. Children still dressed up, but not in imagery tied directly to American-style ghosts or demons. They chose costumes inspired by historical figures, national heroes or their own folk creatures. Candy was handed out freely not to ask for, but to share. And stories told by lamplight were not from foreign television, but passed down by elders. In many such cases, Halloween became a catalyst for renewing Indigenous rights, helping young people feel connected without losing their cultural face. In Asia, the uptake of Halloween often went in the opposite direction. People didn't just accept it, they remolded it to serve modern lifestyles and local aesthetics. In Japan, where the spirit of the unusual and a love of costuming already existed in cosplay, Halloween didn't fit into a trick-or-treat box but became an occasion to perform personal creativity. Halloween night in areas like Shibuya and Harajuku became street festivals where thousands poured into the streets, not to beg for candy, but to show off. Costumes might be ghosts, anime characters, or blends of cute and eerie, reflecting kawaii culture alongside the extraordinary. Here, jack-o'-lanterns sometimes appeared as borrowed visual motifs, but were combined with neon lights, cutesy decor, and street parties that expanded into an unexpected fashion festival. South Korea also didn't merely copy the original. Halloween appeared in major shopping centres as a festival season, blending global trends with local taste. Costuming became part of youth events, mixed with pop music, stage lighting, and group activities. Children and young people attended Halloween parties where their outfits expressed personality, connected on social media, and sometimes turned the night into a backdrop for self-expression rather than supplication or warding off something unseen. In such places, Halloween became a business opportunity. Restaurants and cafes decorated, sold themed specials, and brands used the season to launch limited collections, a versioned and trendy Halloween. In Central and South America, the intersection of Halloween with local festivals created cultural twins. In Mexico, Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, continued as a deeply rooted ritual of ancestor remembrance. But the adjacent influence from Halloween was undeniable. Halloween decorations were sold beside altars, with calavera, decorated skull masks. And in some local celebrations, the two traditions layered, not to conflict, but to create a colourful season. In many areas, children were allowed to dress for both occasions, negotiating emotions that were both reverent and playful. In other regions, the distinction was clear. Dia de los Muertos held the soul, Halloween was the tourist fun, and sometimes that pairing became a livelihood. Tour guides offered autumn trips explaining both. Souvenir shops combined symbols, and local artists used the blend to create works that felt both contemporary and evocative. Not everywhere embraced Halloween easily. In some countries, especially where the cultural spread was perceived as part of Americanization, there was pushback in the name of preserving independence. In some places, cultural and educational leaders promoted creating distinct autumn remembrance days, staging events steeped in local tradition, with traditional dress, old rituals, and cautionary lessons about blindly copying and forgetting roots. Elsewhere, Halloween was restricted publicly, sometimes seen as inappropriate entertainment, but still filtered into life via private gatherings, or youth groups extracting elements they found appealing while discarding what didn't fit family values. Another dimension not to be overlooked is how Halloween was leveraged as a tourism and economic tool in some places. In several cities, especially those with old streets, special Halloween seasons were created to draw visitors. Nighttime walking tours with ghost stories, autumn markets selling themed crafts, and areas turned into designed haunted castles. Safe enough, but eerie enough to give travellers a sense of difference. Small businesses capitalised on jack-o'-lantern imagery, costumes, and interactive experiences to create shared memories. Visitors took photos, posted them on social media, and sparked curiosity among those unfamiliar with Halloween elsewhere. There are also small everyday tinge stories reflecting how Halloween lives and transforms within individual families. A mother in a fringe Asian region teaching herself to make a tiny jack-o'-lantern from recycled materials to place on her balcony, explaining to her child the difference between dressing up for fun and remembering loved ones. Or a group of friends in an Eastern European city hosting a cultural Halloween, where each brings a piece of their homeland's tradition in a gift bag. Simple seasonal sweets, an old story, a homemade costume. Those personal stories, quiet and unassuming, are where Halloween becomes most localized, not through big marketing campaigns, but through affection, creativity, and tacit intergenerational agreement. From all of that emerges a recurring pattern. Halloween is a cloth each place dyes in its own colours. Here it is a framed remembrance. There, the exuberance of street costuming. Elsewhere, a gentle resistance by preserving one's own autumns. And somewhere else, a branded tourism experience, a night for storytelling. The spread is not uniformity, but diversity. A global Halloween is a constellation of local versions, sharing some symbols while differing profoundly in how people choose to participate, understand, and pass it on. The final years of the 20th century, when television, film, and family programming had carried Halloween across North America and into other regions, gave way in the 21st century to an entirely new door: the internet. Halloween night was no longer confined to streets, porches, or local magazines. Now it could spread through a 15-second video, a meme, a TikTok trend, an AR filter on Instagram. And with that, Halloween shifted from a locally rooted festival passed down generationally into a digital-first phenomenon, instant, plural, and shaped by the network of users creating it. At the centre of that change was something clear. Halloween became a digital-first celebration, where many encountered it first by watching others in costume on their feeds instead of going out themselves to knock on doors. People scrolled through costume reveal videos, trick-or-treat haul clips, or short humorous mashups that remix traditional symbols into contemporary versions. From jack-o'-lanterns repurposed as TikTok aesthetic backgrounds to meme Halloween outfits that made the whole internet laugh. Costume ideas spread not just because they were scary, but because they understood meme logic, participated in shared jokes, and signaled that the wearer was in on internet culture. Meme-inspired looks, borrowing from viral characters, internet catchphrases, or remixed images turned into outfits, represented a form of Halloween where dressing up was also a way of saying, "I get the cultural moment." At the same time, social media platforms became supply chains for Halloween ideas. TikTok, Instagram, X, Pinterest all did more than circulate images. They shaped expectations. What to wear this year? How to hit the For You page with this outfit? These are the trending costumes. How to DIY Halloween costume and Get Ready With Me Halloween edition post partially supplanted older homemade traditions. Short-form frames carried instructions, accompanying music, and filters, turning individual creativity into content that could ripple out within hours. Social media didn't just reflect Halloween, it accelerated it. Thus, Halloween spread along two axes. One, rapid viral propagation through trends and memes. Someone wore a look from a viral video, and the next day that costume challenge was remixed into 10 variants. And the other, savvy commercialization. Brands and influencers using Halloween to connect, sell, and drive engagement. Influencer marketing turned outfits into personal storytelling vehicles and brand touchpoints. Creators suggested looks, partnered with companies, unboxed candy or decor, and infused Halloween with the sense that this year I need that or I'll be left behind. Within that burst, a new layer of public meaning negotiation appeared. Cultural sensitivity and appropriation. As Halloween imagery globalized and digitized, costumes once dismissed as harmless fun came under scrutiny. Campaigns and hashtags like #MyCulture is not your costume, spreading strongly on TikTok, began to remind viewers that some outfits drawn from religious, ethnic, or indigenous signifiers aren't neutral jokes, but carry histories, emotions, and consequences. That trend became integrated into modern Halloween. People learned to be creative while respectful, seeking inspired by rather than stealing, sharing how to personalize costumes without inadvertently crossing hurtful lines. Social media also spawned public debates, shaming, and collective feedback. There were doorbell camera videos capturing trick-or-treaters that drew harsh commentary, Halloween shaming. Some, like a viral clip from Maine, pushed back against posting or mocking children going door to door, calling it creepy Halloween shaming. and advocating a more compassionate approach. Halloween is a night for celebration, not judgment. Such reactions expose to the darker side of exposure. When everything is recorded and immediately shared, original moments become subject to analysis and can lose the softness inherent in traditional ritual. In the digital space, Halloween experiences were also reconstructed. Virtual haunted houses, AR filters, turning your face into a skull or witch on your phone camera, and online events, costume parties over Zoom, live-streamed decor tours, or interactive spooky-themed games. Augmented reality allowed users to try on outfits, create virtual pumpkin carvings, or transform a living room into a haunted portal without leaving home. These innovations blended physical and digital, making Halloween a hybrid experience accessible from anywhere. Living in Tokyo, but watching a New York Halloween celebration via direct video, carving a virtual jack-o'-lantern and sharing it on a feed, or joining an interactive ghost story tour designed for the season. At the same time, the internet became a place where diaspora communities and second generations reconnected to roots. A child descended from an Irish immigrant family might search origins of Samhain on YouTube, watch storytelling videos, learn old guising songs, then fuse them with current Halloween trends to present friends with a hybrid version of their own, part magical continuation, part updated personal narrative. Reddit, Discord, and Facebook groups exchange soul cake recipes, traditional infused DIY costume designs, or rewrote tales of Stingy Jack and All Hallows Eve into bite-sized, accessible posts for new generations. This created a feedback loop where the past was reimagined by the present and then spread back as new memory. On platforms like Reddit, you see Halloween-focused subreddits where people showcase haunt setups, share the process of building homemade haunted houses, and celebrate eerie aesthetics while maintaining authenticity. Someone posting a photo walkthrough of a self-built 2024 scare display, recounting nights of work revisions, and the importance of connecting the community around that project. Such spaces preserve new folk craft techniques, high-tech DIY, and inspire others to try. Alongside dissemination and transformation, fragmentation emerged. Some feel Halloween is over-copied, over-commercialized to the point of losing its identity. Others take that very circulation and localize it through hashtags, content challenges, using self-produced music, riffing on trends while anchoring them to personal stories, e.g. remixing a folk song as soundtrack for a traditional themed costume video. Independent media creators produce conscious Halloween content, emphasizing sustainability, reuse, harm-free costuming, and collective experiences not solely dependent on consumption. The digital world also made clear that Halloween is not a fixed entity. It is a cultural meme that self-replicates, mutates, is selfish, humorous, serious, and sometimes contradictory. TikTok had hear me out trends, where young people resurrect supposedly outdated costumes or old meme looks and reinvent them counterintuitively, illustrate the cyclical nature of internet culture. Even when a costume is declared out of trend, it can be summoned, repurposed, and upgraded to suit the mood of the era. As Halloween spreads globally through digital contexts, new memory frameworks form, how-to videos, threads explaining origins, posts like, "I'm an immigrant, here's how my family does Halloween," and "here's what I learnt about appropriation." Algorithms push that content into feeds. Sometimes users accidentally encounter the history of Samhain and then craft their own personalised versions. At the same time, the drive for viral flattens some elements. A wondrous symbol reduced to a sticker, a complex story compressed into a caption, and viewers consuming only the surface unless they dig deeper. That creates a new tension, deep understanding versus instant impression, respecting the roots tested by the speed of spread and simplification. You all find the origin of this holiday interesting, right? Because it's the history of Halloween. So I have a great story I want to tell you. Let's listen together and slip into sleep. If you like it, comment the part that scared you in the comments. I didn't believe in ghosts before this happened. At least I didn't believe enough to go looking for them myself. I'm Ethan, raised in a small town in New England, where Halloween always carried a particular colour. Yellow leaves piling over walkways, jack-o'-lanterns displayed on porches, and old stories recited around campfires, as if they were part of a handed-down rite. I left after college, moved to the big city, and made a living doing a podcast about strange things. This year, in a burst of inspiration for a Halloween special, I decided to go back home to investigate a legend I'd heard as a child. The Lantern House, the abandoned mansion on the edge of Pinecrest Woods where, according to the stories, every few years on the night of October 31st, a faint orange light appears in the second-floor window, and someone inside the house, no one could ever say who, waits for visitors. "Isn't that the old Whitaker place?" my friend Marla asked when I told her the plan. She does graphics for the podcast, always half sceptical and half hungry. "They say the Whitaker family disappeared right after Halloween in 1979. No trace. And since then the lantern shows up. People hear knocking, but no one's ever actually knocked." I laughed. "That's exactly why it's good. Stuff like this pulls listeners around Halloween. We'll go out, record, plant mics in weird corners and do an episode called Into the Dark." We made a plan. Go to the Lantern House on Halloween night. Record everything. Test the legends. Will there be knocking? Will there be a light? Is there really someone looking out from that window? I brought my old recorder, a directional mic, flashlights, and a nervous excitement I tried to mask on the mic with jokes. The road into the woods was narrow. Wind slid through branches and made the leaves seem to whisper. When the car rounded one of the bends, the headlights caught a rusted sign blackened with mould. Pinecrest Road. Caution. Old lantern. Still burns. I scoffed. I didn't know who put it up or why, but one thought, like a whisper in the back of my mind, surfaced. "Don't come back." Marla saw me go quiet and murmured, "Say it. You're kinda getting the chills." I parked a few hundred metres from the house. The distant town lights glowed faintly beyond. Here it was only dark, damp rot, mixing with the smell of moss. We brought 3 small lanterns, old Halloween decorations I'd grabbed from my mum's garage, and set them on a little table by the door to call the night. The iron gate creaked open with a long groan, like a breath. The Whitaker house stood silent. Roof streaked with moss, cracked windows, part of the kitchen porch sagging. There was something in the background of the space. A silence not peaceful but poised, as if the whole place was holding its breath waiting to snap open. We climbed the steps and knocked. Light, polite knocks. "Hello?" I spoke into the mic. Wind hit hard and the sound of our knocking echoed as if swallowed by the walls. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The hinge squealed. Not loud, but enough to make my heart jump. Inside, time felt fractured. Dust lay thick on the floor. Old velvet drapes hung limp like drooping shadows. The stale smell of rotting wood, damp paper, and something faintly sweet, like long-forgotten candy, hung in the air. Marla flipped on her flashlight. Its beam cut through the haze like a knife, making dust float and shimmer. "Better be some mice and some poor soul who had to live here for a while," she whispered, forcing a laugh, but I heard the strain beneath it. We moved into the parlour. On the mantel were the remnants of something burned long ago, witch-shaped Halloween decorations, a singed scrap of black cloth, and an old mirror propped there. The glass was cloudy, and the flashlight's beam reflected me. Tired face, uneven breath. I turned on the recorder and started speaking. "This is Ethan. Halloween night. We're at the Whitaker house. Rumour has it there's light and knocking. If anyone's listening, give us a sign." I forced a grin. "And if there's a ghost, I hope it doesn't hate podcasts." Marla circled, flipping on a secondary camera, sticking small notes with details. She pulled a torn leather notebook from the table. Inside were scrawled pages, heavy handwriting, smears like rainwater, writing tangled with old slang. On the first page was a line. "The lantern doesn't just light, it calls back." Don't look behind you when the light flickers. I scoffed, nudging the book. Who puts warnings like that in an abandoned house? But a small part of me wondered, who last touched this page? Who remembers when it was written? We went up the stairs. They creaked with each step. Midway, a small table held a doll, porcelain with glass eyes. It sat upright in a dirty lace dress, one hand clutching a faded yellow scrap. Something crawled up my spine. Probably placed there for effect, I said, but the voice in my head quieted. Marla leaned in, tapped the doll's head with her flashlight. Its eyes caught the light, and I noticed a fresh crack spreading like a hairline fracture. She exhaled. Okay, the doll is watching. On the second floor we entered a long hallway. Doors stood quietly closed. On the right, the master bedroom door was cracked open. I pushed it. A rush of cold air hit me like an invisible hand. Inside Kamai, the room felt preserved as a wall of time. An empty bed, dust-layered coverlet, and on the nightstand sat a small jack-o'-lantern, not like the ones outside. It looked worn, the pumpkin skin softened, but inside a gentle, orange glow still flickered, like a breathing candle. I felt it hard. No one had touched that thing in years, so who lit it? Marla, I called, voice hoarse. She stepped in, eyes wide. It's still burning. We got closer, and the light inside the pumpkin wasn't steady. The carved smile, at first a familiar traditional face, triangular eyes, a crooked grin, shifted in a blink. The eyes tilted as if focusing on me, and the mouth narrowed into a thin mile, eerily like the way I grip my teeth when I concentrate. I stepped back, my heart raced. Hey, you're just imagining it, right? Marla whispered. I didn't answer. The lantern began to tremble gently. The glow flickered faster. A small sound, like staccato breath, flickered from inside. Not wind, not electrical noise, but a sharp gasp, as if someone were holding breath and trying not to let it go. I brought the recorder closer. If anyone's there, say my name. Nothing. Just the light shifting into the shape of another face, this time gaunt, hollowed eyes, and a mouth unnaturally stretched as if trying to swallow the space around it. I felt the temperature drop down into my bones. Then suddenly, bang! The sound of a window slamming shut across the room. We both flinched and the jack-o'-lantern blew out. Absolute black filled the space for a moment. Then I heard something laugh. A long, raspy laugh. Not human, drifting in the air. Let's go, Marla whispered, eyes darting around. I wondered why I wasn't moving. My leg lifted, but something held me back. In the mirror on the opposite wall, reflected wasn't just us. A man stood behind me. He wore an old suit, hair fluffy, his face blurred like mist, and his eyes were looking straight at me. I turned. No one. Just cracked plaster. I looked back at the mirror. He was still there, his mouth now open. And from it came a faint sound, like a whisper tangled in wind. Ethan. I don't remember if I screamed or hissed. Get out! All I know is Marla grabbed my arm, bumped the nearby chair so it tipped slightly, and the mirror trembled like a small bell. Light from outside, brief, flared, then faded. We're getting out, right now, Marla said, keeping her voice from shaking. We turned and bolted down the stairs without looking back. Halfway down the hallway I heard another whisper, so close I felt warmth on my neck, but I couldn't pass the words. Back in the parlour, the jack-o'-lantern that had been on the floor was now knocked over. It was dead. Beside it lay something new. A black and white photograph, not there before, face down. And above it, in smeared black ink, a message. Don't give up before the light comes back on. I turned, and in the dark at the top of the stairs, something like a vague shadow stood, half hidden behind a torn curtain. A beat, a slight nod as if acknowledgement. Then it dissolved into the wall. We didn't say much. I picked up the photo. On the back was written Whitaker House, Halloween 1979. I flipped it. It was a picture of a family, a man, a woman and a child, all smiling. In the child's face I saw something off, a small head lit in an odd way, and behind, a faint blur, was the silhouette of a man standing behind them, the same figure from the mirror. I turned on the recorder, voice rough. We saw something strange. If anyone lived here, say my name. I'm Ethan. We don't want to hurt, we just want to know what happened. No reply, only wind at the window and my own heart thudding in my ears. Then, like a sudden jolt, the room lit. It was fast. And in the sliver of light, I saw not one, but many pale faces hanging above the fireplace. Gaunt, twisted, eyes turned toward us. Then shadows swallowed them all. Marla turned, eyes wide. We have to go. Record it all. Just leave. On the porch, the door slammed shut behind us. Not wind. I felt a cold gust sweep past. And outside, under the thin moonlight, I saw a figure standing still in front of the house. Like a man in an old suit, motionless. I was speechless. The figure raised a hand. A small wave, then faded into the dark. On the drive back, we didn't speak. Only the sound of wheels and the engine. At my place, I sat alone, replayed the recording. The last part of the file was static, then a voice. Hoarse, almost a whisper. Clear. Halloween night isn't over. The light will come back, they're coming. I played it twice. Not me, not Marla, not wind. I'd promised myself I wouldn't go back alone. But the whisper on the recording, the voice saying my name, didn't give me a choice. It wasn't pleading. It was an appointment. And when I listened the third time, that dragged, pushed feeling radiating out of my chest, I knew. If I didn't go, I wouldn't sleep. If I went, I might see more than I should. The next night I went back. This time Marla wasn't with me. She said, I'm not becoming B-roll cut from a disappearance story. I understood. I could have used her for the podcast setup and let her sleep safe. But another part of me, the storyteller, was triggered. I brought less, the recorder, a flashlight, the Whitaker family photo I'd shot close up the night before. And one other thing. A scrap of pumpkin skin from the small jack-o'-lantern in the second-floor bedroom. I'd taken it when the light went out, and whatever appeared in the mirror showed itself. It was still warm, like it had just been touched. I slid the pumpkin piece into a cloth pouch, feeling something like an invisible fingertip press lightly along my spine each time I touched it. The road was quieter. The wind didn't just blow, it stretched as if trying to pull out creaks from the branches. When I reached the gate, I didn't set up the decorative lanterns. I brought a single black wax candle, what I imagined as an upgrade in communication. Old light meeting new. I told myself that if whoever was here wanted to continue, I'd ask plainly, who are you? Why doesn't the light go out? And why have they come back? The door opened easily. No knocking, no creak of hinges. Something was different from the start. It wasn't the waiting from the night before, but a quiet, absorbed welcome. I turned on the recorder, spoke aloud, trying to keep my voice even. This is Ethan, alone. Monday night. Halloween. I'm back. My name is Ethan. I want to understand. Whoever is here, tell me what happened. I placed mics in corners, letting whoever was listening speak on any audible frequency. I went straight up to the second floor. The stairs creaked again. But this time the sound had an odd pattern, like a measured count. 1, 2, 3, 4, my own steps. Then a beat pause. Then a soft squeak behind me, not clear enough to be a footstep, but a presence. I spun, flashlight sweeping the empty hall. Nothing. I drew a breath. The sound echoed back like someone else exhaling after me. The large bedroom remained unchanged, the jack-o'-lantern still on the bedside table, its light flickering faintly like a heart trying to beat. I set the recorder close and lit the black candle in the room. When the flame touched the wick, a soft hiss like burning paper whispered, and the jack-o'-lantern seemed to respond. The carved, smiling face no longer held still. It shifted slowly, like a stretched frame of film, and the folds of its mouth opened as if speaking. Without sound, just a very faint vibration in the air, like a word being pulled into a frequency. I lifted the piece of pumpkin skin. The scrap was warm, wreathed in faint vapour. I whispered, "I know you are here. I know something's been kept. Who lit this lantern and why haven't they gone?" Silence. Then from the corner of the room, a small clear laugh, almost like a child being teased, rang out. I turned. No one was there, but on the wall, in the small mirror beside the dressing table, I saw a reflection, not my own. A little girl in an old dress, her hair tangled, eyes deep and hollow standing behind me. She didn't move, just stared. I didn't dare breathe hard. She tilted her head as if listening, then raised one small hand, and from it a thin wisp of light, like smoke, drifted out and wrapped around the pumpkin skin in my hand. It felt like a mild electric tingle running up my wrist. "Sis." The whisper, indistinct. I leaned toward the mirror. The girl said nothing more. She opened her mouth. In the brief moment I saw small teeth, and in the gap between them a character scrawled, bleeding into the air. "Keep the promise." I started the recorder again. My voice lost its pretense. "Who are you? Who are you in the Whitaker house?" The girl in the mirror did not vanish. Instead, she slowly pointed downward, toward the floor where the bottom of the bedside cabinet bulged slightly, as if a drawer were unevenly closed. I knelt, pulled it open. Inside was a stack of papers, dozens of tangled notes, and in the middle a small leather-bound notebook, its cover dusted with a pale, powdery residue. I opened it. The first page held a crude drawing of a family: Mr. Whitaker, Mrs. Whitaker, and the little girl, the same one in the mirror. Beneath the sketch, in blurred ink scrawl, was a line: "I wouldn't let you go, I wouldn't let winter take. So I held the light. In return I give, every Halloween, a piece. They come back to keep, do not break." I turned the page. The following entries, written in shaking hand, told how Whitaker's father had made a pact with something he called the holding light, an amalgam of prayer and twisted folk ritual, using the jack-o'-lantern as a network to anchor his daughter's spirit to the world. But each time the lantern burned, it didn't only give light, it pulled in part of those who approached, as if their presence was recorded into the pumpkin skin and the smile, holding them like a layer of burn on the light. Those trapped, curious visitors, investigators, were in some part kept, feeding the strength of that light. The cost was, they come back, fragments cut from those who had come before, bound to remain so that something would persist for her. I heard a soft tap, very soft, from behind. I turned, flashlight sweeping the hall. No one. When I looked back at the notebook, a new line had appeared. Not because I turned. It. Ink bloomed in red across the page. The next one will take a piece home. Choose who. My heart hammered. I felt the presence behind me, not in the mirror now, but at my chest, as if someone leaned against my back, unseen. I spun. No one. Only the girl in the mirror, standing still, her eyes wider. "I don't want to," I said. My voice was low, barely enough for something to hear. The girl in the mirror raised her hand, pointing down, downstairs. A cold gust blew up, snuffing most of the black candle, leaving only a smeared blue flame and the wavering glow of the jack-o'-lantern. I followed the sign. The passage down to the old cellar beneath the parlour was hidden by a rotted rug. When I pulled it back, the wooden stairs creaked and exhaled, a heavy layered air, whispers forming a bass tone. The cellar wasn't pitch dark. In the far corner, dozens of small jack-o'-lanterns, each hand-carved by previous visitors, rested on stone ledges. Their orange lights pulsed like breaths, Each face was different, cracked, warped, some oozing, a resin-like sap from within. And among them, in the reflected glow and fractured panes, I recognised faces, some from earlier forums about those missing after visiting Whitaker, and one, with familiar worn detail, bore a face I knew, Marla's. I approached. On the jack-o'-lantern, with deep carved eyes and a small smile, was taped a yellowed note. "If you don't come with me, you must become you." In the dim light, the face wasn't fully still. A tiny movement at the mouth, a twitch like a half smile. And from inside, I heard Marla's laugh. Warped, choked. Not whole, but I knew that sound. The one she made when I pulled some stunt. I staggered back, throat tight. The old jack-o'-lantern's skin in my pocket began to tremble. Light leaked from it, and in a flash I saw Marla holding the camera, smiling, then being drawn into darkness, then gone. I gasped as if someone had gripped my throat. A loud sound echoed overhead. Thud! Like a door slamming hard. I turned. On the stairs above, in the murky light, a figure stood. Featureless, tall, wearing what seemed like an old suit and white shirt. Its face indistinct except for something. Eyes without light staring straight at me. It felt like hundreds of eyes beneath the skin concentrating. "Do not leave," the whisper extended. Less a sentence than a clinging pressure in the air. The girl in the mirror above, through the hazy reflection, waved. But that wave was not a plea for help. It was a reminder. Choose who. I ran. I tore up the stairs, through the bedroom, down the hall, across the parlour. The jack-o'-lantern on the mantel now burned brighter, its light sharp like a cut of red-orange. And for a moment an image flickered within, a man with the same face as the one in the mirror earlier, his mouth stretched open. Behind him layered dark silhouettes, like shadows pasted upon one another. I burst, outside, my chest aching. At the gate I looked up, the house silent. But in the second-floor window a point of orange light glowed. It wasn't an ordinary jack-o'-lantern anymore. It blinked in a pattern I understood, like a calling bell, and that light seemed to remember me. I knew then I wasn't just a visitor. I was a piece. I was the chosen one, not entirely by choice. I heard again the line from the notebook. "The next one will take a piece home. Choose who." I ran home. On the way I heard something, not loud, not clear, but enough that I recognised Marla's voice, warped, tangled in the wind. "Don't let it... light again." I locked the door. I didn't go on air. I didn't call anyone. I sat in my room under dim yellow light, opened the files. The last segment from that night, more than the wind-mingled voice, contained another layer, a lyrical whisper, as if someone spoke into my ear. "We kept the promise. You bring them home. They're coming back. Don't go alone again." I knew I had to decide. Break something. But how when there's a whole network of jack-o'-lanterns under the house? Or keep digging and hope to find a way to free them. And free Marla. I brought Marla back. Not in the way I expected. She didn't fully come alive, like in those ghost stories around campfires. She showed up one quiet evening after I sent her the recording, texting, "If you're still hearing it, I'm coming. I'll go with you." I don't know if she really had a choice, or if something in that house pulled her, like it pulled me. But she appeared on my doorstep, with dark circles under her eyes, her mouth twitching as if trying to hide something. She brought the camera, but the heaviest thing was a bundle wrapped in black cloth. She put her hand on my shoulder, too light, but enough that I felt cold under my skin, and whispered, "I hear it. It's inside me now. It told me I have to give it someone else or I'll be gone." We went back to the Whitaker house together. This time it wasn't a visit. It was touching the centre of the bargain. The house and the light seemed to know we were coming. On the porch, the second-floor jack-o'-lantern was lit. Not just flickering, but trembling like an angry heart. The light called, not with words, but with sensation. Gooseflesh rose on my arms, a chorus of indistinct whispers in my head. and beneath them a recurring tone, like a name dragged out. We brought the Whitaker notebook, the black candle, and something else, a shard of mirror. From the old parlour mirror I'd kept a piece when it trembled the night before. The girl in the mirror had said, "Use reflection. Let those who are pulled pass through." I assumed it was the link. The mirror that had held images of those who were taken could now act as intermediary. We began. In the second-floor bedroom, the jack-o'-lantern still sat on the bedside table. Its smiling face had become tied to memory. Under the candlelight, hairline cracks glowed like cross fractures. Marla placed her hand on the lantern, closed her eyes and whispered something in her voice. But not entirely her voice. The sound layered, two tones overlapping. Marla's delayed, warped, and something else, rough, vibrating, responding to each word. "I keep the promise," she said. "A part in exchange, freedom." I opened the notebook and read the last entry. To break the promise, one must give back a substitute piece, a part of oneself, or a piece they keep as bait. No one leaves whole. They come back to keep the light from going out. The new one will carry the mark. I understood that they come back wasn't just the apparitions in the house. It was an exchange. The Whitaker daughter held, other spirits anchored, and whoever came seeking became the bearer of that mark. I'd been tagged the first time I heard my name in the mirror. Marla had a piece held in the jack-o'-lantern, down in the cellar, as an old video in one of those lanterns had hinted. "We have to sever it," I whispered. "I'll give it my piece. A laugh, not Marla's, sounded behind us, sharper, barely audible and unintelligible. The air bowed. I felt a cold shadow slide down the back of my neck. "Choose who?" the whisper came, vibrating through my skin. Marla turned. Her eyes were not the same as before. There was a hollow inside, but within it a look trying to hold herself together. "I can't give back something I don't understand. It eats laughter. It told me to take your piece, give it to it, then you won't be pulled deeper." I looked at the broken mirror. Part of its reflection showed not just us, but a blurred overlay. The suited man, the faint shadow still standing behind, and the smaller face, the girl. She raised her hand. A thin beam of light from her palm flowed onto the shard, then poured down, like falling into a void in the air, and the whisper softened. "Give." I knew what to do. I pulled from my pocket an old necklace, a family keepsake I'd worn since childhood, with my mother's image. I placed it between the jack-o'-lantern and the mirror. Its light reflected onto the carved smile. I leaned in and whispered, "I choose my piece. I bring my piece. Give her back." The lantern trembled, not jolting like before, but shivering, like a body trying to breathe. Light from it spread, hit the mirror, then flowed into the necklace. A low screech filled the space, like warped metal. The light drew from the necklace into the lantern. For a moment I saw clearly, an image of myself being pulled, a portion of flesh beneath the skin, quivering as if a quiet flame ran through it. Not painful, but recorded. Then silence. The jack-o'-lantern snapped off. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the faint glow of the black candle. I felt weight, something unfamiliar but known, under my right ribs, like something watching outwards, as if eyes not made of flesh were observing. Marla went still, then started to cry, a sound not entirely of the living. Her voice stuttered, as if pieces of her were coming back. She turned to the mirror, the girl in the glass, her face fading, smiling. Then she was no longer just a reflection. She stood between us, solid, wounded, but with a trace of relief. She pulled Marla's hand, and Marla bowed her head into the girl's shoulder, as if embracing a long-lost friend. "I don't hear it anymore, Marla mumbled. It backed off, but not fully. It said, now you carry the light. Halloween will choose. At that moment, a bang echoed from the cellar, deeper and louder than any door slamming. A reaction. The jack-o'-lanterns below all flared simultaneously. In each, old faces, Marla's previous version and those who had come, flickered in the glow. A cold breath rose and the whispers piled. We're coming back, choose who? The girl turned to me, her mouth opened, not to speak but to convey, cannot leave, you carry, you go. I realised I hadn't freed anything. I had only swapped places. The girl was pulled out of the network in exchange for a part of me, a cut, unseen, existing under my skin, so that whenever a jack-o'-lantern burned somewhere, I felt a faint tremor as if someone touched me. Marla leaned into the girl, now calling herself Lila, the Whittaker girl, partially restored but with gaps. Her laugh was on the verge of cracking, and sometimes in the night I'd hear her say automatically, choose who, then shake her head, startled. We left the house before dawn. On the porch, the second-floor light flared once more, like a look, not exactly anger, but acknowledgement. There's a new one. Back home, I examined myself in the mirror. Under my skin, where my right ribs lay, was a smudge-like mark, unexplainable in normal light. Every time I touched it, I heard a barely audible whisper, indistinct, like, Halloween will choose. Marla sat beside me, still holding Lila's hand, and murmured, I think I've got enough left to help you, like you helped me. But it's not quiet. It says, I carry a piece of you in dreams. It has no clear name. It waits for the next Halloween. I knew it was true. Something had stuck to me. Not an obvious curse, but a connection. Whenever any jack-o'-lantern burned somewhere in town, I felt a small vibration, as if someone touched me. I opened the notebook to the last pages. A new line had appeared, written in faded black ink like breath. You brought them back, now you hear. Halloween doesn't choose just one, it spreads. The end of chapter 1 is a cold realisation. I'm not just an investigator. I'm a bearer of part of something. Part light, part promise. And now Halloween is no longer a single night to fear. It's a cycle. It's a game with leaders and led. Marla, still not fully herself, agrees to help me find the true origin of the holding light. And Lila, the Whittaker girl, sits quietly beside us, her hollow eyes sometimes flickering, as if seeing someone else in the void. We have to go deeper, I said. If this is a promise, someone wrote the initial contract. If someone made the deal, maybe there's a way to free them. Lila looked at me, lips parting slightly. They are below. We came back, not hoping to silence it, but with a purpose, to find the opening of the contract, understand its terms, and if possible, find a way to reverse it. The "they come back" was no longer vague. It was a circle we had stepped into, and now we had to go all the way down to see who first carved the groove. Marla brought an old oil lamp she said had been given to her in dreams. Not an ordinary thing, but something she believed could hold the darkness at bay, at least enough so we could see. Lila, the Whittaker girl, was quieter. She was still small, but not entirely as she had been. There were moments when she'd look into the air and smile at someone only she could see. Sometimes she'd whisper, "They're below. They wait. Choose who." I began to understand that choose who wasn't just a prompt. It was the echo of something else asking, who's next to carry the mark? We opened the old notebook and found the original writing of Abraham Whittaker, the patriarch who had recorded it. The first lines told of a little girl stricken with illness during a harsh winter, skin cold like wax, breath short, and the prophecy of a strange woman who appeared near the communal fields. Fire can hold, light can hide. Bring your daughter's spirit in, so the warmth does not fade. In return, whoever comes will give a peace, and the light will not die. Abraham wrote that he agreed. He didn't call it a ghost or devil. He called it the Firekeeper, an entity appearing as a wavering amber flame in hay on Samoan night. It spoke little. It gave him a promise written in smoke and light. His daughter's soul would not be swept away if he kept the flame burning, and to keep the flame alive, used the small lights of those who came to listen. Curious gazes, knocks, costumed footsteps, each attention adding a thread to the web, keeping the light from dying. In return, there had to be an exchange piece, a fragment of the visitor held in place of the loss. Part of them became under the light, drawn back each Halloween, forming the jack-o'-lanterns in the cellar, feeding something Abraham did not dare name favour or curse. The final detail, written in trembling hand, read, "If one day I wish to break the promise, I must return what was taken. I must sever the bond, use reflection to reveal, give of myself. But there is one more thing. Someone must volunteer to fill the void so the light does not collapse." I looked up. "Volunteer?" Lila turned, her eyes deeper black than usual. She spoke in a rasp like wind through dry leaves. "No one volunteers. Halloween chooses. Someone just says, 'I'll go,' then it takes." We concluded, to understand we had to go below. The cellar we first saw was not only a storage for jack-o'-lanterns. There was a deeper chamber, hidden behind thick stone, where Abraham seemed to have performed the first rite. We pulled up the rotten rug. In the parlour, revealed a small wooden door, and opened a spiral stair descending inward. The smell of damp earth, a mix of burnt sugar sweetness and cold metal, poured out. Marla's lamp glowed in the low space, the yellow light jittering across mossed walls. We went down. At the bottom, it was not just lanterns this time. There was a circle of carved stone, filled with strange sigils, part ancient script, part web-like fracture, and in the centre an old dusty altar, and small pebbles arranged into the shape of an eye. On the altar sat a slender wooden box engraved with the symbol of a lantern encased in a star. I opened the lid. Inside was a seed of light, no larger than a bean, bright like embers yet giving off no heat, resting in a waxen core, surrounded by parchment scraps bearing the names of those who had come and been marked. Many names were faded. One was of a woman from the 1950s, Clara Monroe, annotated with a black dot cracked, and beneath it, I heard it whisper in dreams. It said, "Bring it to my daughter. I don't know what I lost." Marla gently touched the seed with her fingertip, and the light within trembled like a heartbeat. A breeze rushed through, carrying a whisper. "Choose who?" I placed the broken mirror shard on the stone altar, facing the seed. The reflection layered into a ripple. In the shard, not reflecting me but showing another scene, Abraham stood here, eyes wide, holding a large jack-o'-lantern. Behind him the shadowy flicker of a flame form, indistinct. Behind him something like an ash-made figure loomed, and over there, the Whitaker girl lay on a bed, the light from the seed wrapping around her. She smiled peacefully, but her gaze rested elsewhere, like she was looking at someone not captured in the image. Something slammed down, not physical, but a weight like air crushing into a low hiss. The entire room fell silent, so sharp that each of our breaths sounded like a strike. The seed pulsed faster, its gold dimming, and from deep in my mind a voice echoed, "Do not break. Choose who." Lila gripped Marla's hand, then suddenly stepped toward the altar. She bent, placing her small palm on the seed. A thin beam of light shot up, coiling around her like threads. She gave a quiet cry, not of pain but as if a word was being drawn from her throat. "I see them." On the mirror's surface, the image ceased being a frozen past. It shifted. Abraham's face warped, his mouth widening into an unnatural grin. The flame figure behind him clarified, not merely light, but a tall shadow, with eyes like ember and white teeth opening and closing. The Whitaker girl in the image turned her head, and this time looked directly at us. "Do not break." A voice layered many times over rang inside my head. "Choose who, or let me continue to hold." Marla pulled Lila back, and then something I hadn't seen before. A small stone door behind the altar opened slightly. No one touched it. It revealed another cavity, deeper, and inside something slowly moving like a latent mass of light. I stepped forward. The three of us stood at the mouth of the new pit. Cold air poured out, and from within the whispering was no longer abstract. A string of names, those I'd heard in dreams and half-sleep. Marla's name, and then mine. Not spoken fully, but sliced through the air like a paper blade. "Ethan, Marla!" "Who's next?" A fractured laugh broke loose. Neither child nor adult. It was a blend of hoarse chuckles and the creak of old wood splitting. Lila turned, and now her eyes weren't deep black, but a slit of light piercing straight into me. "Choose who," she said, but her voice was not purely her own. It carried Abraham's tone and layers of other sounds. "You want to break the promise?" I asked, my voice tight. "You'll need someone." Lila closed her eyes, and when she opened them, a tear didn't fall. It was a small light dropping, leaving a streak on the stone. "You bring the peace." I understood. To break it required exchange. A part of me would have to fill the void. Something below was waiting, not simply to free the girl, but to take a new portion into the web. And the whisper beneath continued without pause. "Choose who. Halloween will choose." A gust tore from the deeper chamber. The broken mirror shard in my hand turned ice cold. Below, a sound tapped the stone. Thud. Thud. Steady, echoing the same rhythm of the stairs I'd first heard. Marla whispered, "I don't want to keep this cycle, but I think I know how to give back a piece." She reached out, pulling me close, looking me straight in the eye. "If I put my piece in there, it will take from me, and maybe it will retreat." I couldn't believe it. Both the idea of giving one's own piece and the ambiguity of "it will retreat." That meant another part of us would again be held in the next cycle. But in Lila's eyes I saw a faint plea. Do it before it chooses someone else. I took a deep breath. My hand went to the smudge beneath my right ribs, the thing that had attached to me from the last Halloween. The old tremor flared like a reflex. I set my family necklace on the altar and spoke. "I agree. I'll give. But if I do, there has to be a way to keep her free. There must be another condition." Something exhaled. Not air, but a vibration in the bone. The seed flared sharply, then flickered. The small stone door behind the altar slowly widened, revealing another object. Not wood, but a block of filthy black light. And inside, something like a flame drawn taut. The original shape of the Firekeeper. It did not appear directly. It communicated through sensation. Choose who. Send. Something new will carry. The promise is renamed. I looked at Marla. She nodded. In her eyes burned something like resolve and fear. At once, she reached in, pulling the little strand of light from beneath her chest, a soft filament clinging to skin, and placed it into the box. The box shivered. From within came faint cries like those of the lost. The light from my necklace flowed into the seed on the altar. Lila quietly placed her hand on my head, and for a moment I saw the girl in the mirror, not blurred, smile truly, briefly, then dissolve into a wisp of light that flowed into the seed. A soft but crushing pop echoed around. The space shook. The jack-o'-lanterns in the corners of the cellar went out. An oppressive silence fell. The deeper chamber opened a narrow slit, and a real light, gentle, not sharp, emerged, as if a segment of the web had been released. Lila collapsed, lying still. Her eyes were no longer dark. Marla gasped, sitting beside me. I felt the void, not on skin, but beneath my ribs, like a small empty place where something had walked out. Something was quietly withdrawing. Then from below the whisper changed. It no longer commanded choose who. It became another murmur. The contract has been renamed. You carry, Halloween will remember. What arrived does not leave. We crawled up, pulled the stone door closed behind us. Back in the parlour, the light from the mantel jack-o'-lantern burned weakly. Lila whispered, I don't hear it. But it left a trace. It's waiting. Marla turned to me with something I'd never seen in her eyes. It didn't go completely. I still hear choose who in dreams, but this time it asked differently. Was it brought by someone? I looked at the notebook. A new line had appeared. The promise has been altered. A part returned, but the cycle is not broken. Those who come now are not only chosen, they are bearers. Halloween will remember the names. And then I realised we hadn't freed anything. We'd only changed the terms, swapped a brick in the circle. The Whittaker girl, Lila, had been pulled out of the web. But other parts of it, parts of me, parts of Marla remained stuck. Something below had shifted how it calls out. No longer merely choose who, but who brought it. The days after the incident in the cellar, none of us slept through the night. Lila dreamed of other children, faded faces of those once caught in the jack-o'-lantern web. They didn't speak, just stared, then sank into the dimming light as if waiting for something. She woke each morning with eyes blazing red, as if the night never left, occasionally whispering broken phrases. They're waiting. No one comes on their own. You bring. Marla changed noticeably. She smiled like before, but there was always a twitching silence lodged inside it, as if another echo had intruded, a beat not her own. Some afternoon she'd sit quiet, staring out the window without a word, then suddenly snap, choose who, and shake her head, like she'd just remembered something she couldn't say. When I asked, she only murmured, I feel my old stories being erased, replaced by another sound. I'm not sure if it's mine or from someone who was here. As for me, I hear it, not as directly as before, not just a whisper calling my name, but as a sensation. Whenever some jack-o'-lantern somewhere in town lights up, even just on a neighbour kid's porch, I sense something moving at the corner of my eye, a shadow that, when I turn, is nothing. But when I look back, there's a faint trace of light in the air, like someone just pulled their hand away. Each time, part of me breathes deeper. Not my breath, but an echo from the network, as if something is logging. Who brought the next one? We began widening the circle of investigation. After a quieter night, Lila woke saying she had seen Abraham, not as the shadowed figure in the mirror, but as a touchable image. The old man sitting at the head of the bed, holding another notebook, raising a hand as if signalling. In that dream, Abraham didn't curse. He whispered, rename it. Don't let them think they've won. They misunderstood what they begged for. Then he looked through Lila, his eyes resting on my heart, and she knew I heard. We went to the city library and met Evelyn Hayes, the local archives keeper. A middle-aged woman with eyes that glinted seen a lot, following hints from an old diary of a clergyman who once intervened at the Whittaker house. She produced a binder of old clippings, correspondence and a pinned page, a 1980 snippet about a family investigating Halloween at the Whittaker house vanished, accompanied by a pastor's note. They tried to undo darkness by looking into it through mirrors. They didn't know the darkness could return under the name they gave it. Evelyn listened as we spoke, then slowly pulled out a photograph, a blurred picture of real people standing before a cluster of small jack-o'-lanterns. In the right corner, a young woman with a pensive gaze wore a necklace like mine. Faintly behind her was a shape resembling Marla, but the face was indistinct. Under the photo, she opened another book. List of those, who thought they could re-sign, alter the terms. Some lost memory so much they forgot their own names. Others vanished. Those who survived were carried. The they come back you've been telling me about, she said, isn't just return. It's a form of receiving and remembering, and behind it was an original phrase they used, renaming the contribution. She slid forward a faded page, a ritual stitched from folk legends, and a passage of what read like a handwritten agreement in archaic script. The opening line, "The bearer of light gives a name, the bringer is remembered, and chooses another to hold the space." "Is there any way to break it completely?" I asked, clutching the Whitaker notebook. Evelyn placed her hand on the wood table and looked me straight in the eye. "Those before you tried. They thought bringing back a piece as compensation would wipe the chain. Instead, they only renamed it, and something learned to speak differently. When it no longer has to ask choose who, it asks who brought it. That's the difference." Lila let out a small laugh, her voice layered, childlike, and something overlaid. "It doesn't have to force, it waits, someone brings themselves." I pulled back and said, "So we don't argue over who's next to be carried. We have to act. If it now asks who brought it, then we have to bring something conscious, enough to free Lila without letting it consume us." Evelyn nodded. "In old law, there's a thing called the resurrection fire, a Samoan entry in an ancient notebook where people quench the old hearth and lit a new one, calling back former spirits to negotiate. What you're doing is like a reverse resurrection, renaming, exchanging light. But there is still a price." The plan began to take shape. To attempt to break the renaming portion, we would put the who brought it onto a new frame, not letting it self-select, but placing it within a new rule set. We would use elements: reflection, the Whitaker mirror shard, a conscious exchange piece, personal tokens, my necklace, something from Marla, and a small memory fragment Lila kept in a tiny box, and a fire kindled from the original Samhain blaze of the town, where Abraham first saw the firekeeper, Evelyn, knowing the location of the remnant rock, part of the old hearth foundation. Halloween night was approaching. The air thickened, as if the world below waited for the needle to touch the chain. Marla experienced little twitches, laughing one moment, silent and staring at the horizon the next. "I see names," she said one day. "People who came before. They lie in the light but don't speak to each other. They just look. Some seem to want out, some nod." Lila said, "If no one brings themselves, then I will, but I don't want anyone else to be the exchange." She placed her small hand over my chest. I felt a soft tremor, like a child's promise. "Don't let it take me again." We began preparations. I reconstructed the mirror shard with an old piece of glass to fashion a makeshift, reflective frame, soaked the necklace in ember dust from the old Samhain fire. Marla brought a small vial containing a part of laughter, an old tradition she found in Evelyn's notebooks, where laughter was recorded and preserved as a memory lock, now repurposed intentionally as an exchange. Lila carried a scrap of fabric from the dress in the family photo, what she called her remembrance piece. Halloween came fast. The wind carried the smell of damp leaves and ash from the field beyond. Distant children's laughter echoed, with something off in it, like someone mimicking. We met Evelyn again at the old fire hill, the broken marker still bearing the year, and brought the full gear: the mirror, the tokens, the black candle blended with Samhain ember, and a small wrapped box containing the execution of the new agreement. 3 conscious exchange pieces, arranged in a circle, ready to replace what had been held. By the time we reached the hilltop, clouds thickened, moonlight leaking through. The grass where the old fire once burned was still blackened with dry ash, the old stones lying silent, awaiting a sign. A handful of shadowy figures emerged, not strangers, but those from rumour. A middle-aged woman who was Clara Monroe's granddaughter, a college student who had researched the disappearance years back, and an elderly couple keeping something like a memory box of a past relative. Each bore a trace: a ring, a small indistinct scar, a distant gaze. But they came for the same reason. I want to understand. I want to exchange. That night, the fire didn't ignite on its own. We arranged stones into a circle, like Abraham's diagrams, placed the mirror to the north, the new light box in the centre, my necklace, Marla's laughter vial, and Lila's remembrance piece at the corners, each lightly burned to scent with smoke, not poisonous but dense, and began to call out, not to ask but to set terms. I led, we no longer allow choose who, we name. We bring intentionally. If something wants to hold a soul, it must agree. And if it agrees, it must release a part before taking. We trade a piece so Lila can go free. But that piece is not meaningless. A wind hissed and the ash in the centre glowed. Not with red flame, but with a cold orange emanation rising from below. The old seed of light beneath the ash trembled. Clearly, deeper down, the firekeeper was stirring. A heavy pressure fell. For a moment, the faint silhouettes of the Whitaker house's cellar jack-o'-lanterns flickered in the sky. Not physical, but reflected in the air. And a voice, or more accurately many voices together, spoke. Choose who? Who brought it? Marla, her voice layered, and not entirely her own, replied, We bring, we name. We do not let it choose. Lila reached out, small but resolute, and placed her remembrance piece onto the fleeting light in the ash. The seed darkened. Then another light sprang up. Not the grotesque grin of a jack-o'-lantern, but a brief image. Young Abraham, weary smile, looking up. And behind him a new form unlike before. Not a tall shadow, but a network of hundreds of small eyes radiating from the stone. I lit the necklace. The laughter in Marla's box harmonised, no longer twisted. It blended with the whispers of those who had come. The contract renames. The contract agrees. A flash of light erupted, not blinding but simultaneously cold and hot, and I felt something pull from me. It didn't hurt, but it was like a small star moving from under my right ribs upward, streaking, then lingering gently, like an old memory tapped. Lila trembled, then went still. Marla exhaled, her face no longer distant. It's hearing, Evelyn whispered. It's negotiating. We waited. There was no sudden outburst, just a sharp silence. Then something answered, not in words but as a sensation. I accept. I release. A new name will be given, but the chain remains. Whoever brings it will be recorded. Halloween will remember. The light faded. Ash dissolved like mist. The stone ring cooled. Something retracted, not fully gone, but contracted as if being wrapped. Lila breathed out and opened her eyes. She said, in a voice soft as wind, I don't hear it, but you carry. Marla turned to me, her eyes shining. I don't hear choose who like before. Now it asks, who brought it? And I know the answer. I touched beneath my ribs. The sensation remained, a small tremor, but it no longer resonated every time a jack-o'-lantern burned. A new line appeared on the last page of the Whitaker notebook when we opened it. The promise has been renamed. The bringer knows. Lila is free, but the light bears a name. Ethan, Marla, Halloween remembers. We didn't celebrate. It was lighter, but something still lay there, a thin membrane altered, not broken. Lila sat amid the stone circle, looking up at the clouded sky. It's still waiting. But now it asks differently. One thing became clear. We could no longer do it alone. The who brought it had become more self-aware. It knew we could act. It would not sit passively waiting for anyone naive to bring itself. It would begin seeking those who acted, those who could name and then bring. The consequences of the renaming didn't arrive all at once. It was like a crack spreading through water. At first just a fine line, then layered shifts, ripples, and then things that couldn't be fully undone. Marla began losing fragments of memory. Not everything, but enough to leave her caught between remembering and not. One morning she told me, I remember when I was little, my mother taught me to bake, but the name of the cake is gone. What am I even eating? Then a moment later, choose who? And she flinched as if pulled out of some other dream. She was no longer certain why she'd come to me the first time. She said parts of her old stories felt worn away, replaced by another echo, like a prompt. Who brings the next one? Lila seemed lighter. She smiled more, and her sleep was no longer weighed down by the shadows as before. But whenever Halloween approached, she'd jerk awake, whispering, "Who brings the next one?" Not as a question, but as if listening to an echo waiting for an answer. I began to feel it myself. That echo had shifted from "who will be chosen" into a hanging question, a kind of unspoken burden placed on the shoulders. Who will bring themselves? Then someone came, not a new victim in the way we had assumed. It was a middle-aged man appearing amid the Halloween festivities in town, an evening when the suburbs glittered with jack-o'-lanterns, kids chattered going door to door, and houses glowed orange. He was selling hand-carved pumpkins at the corner of a small park. His table displayed small lanterns, with faces unlike anyone's, odd light flickering from within. His gaze didn't fix on anyone. But when I walked by, a sensation like being recorded washed over me. Something ancient, very old, as if I'd seen this man before, in a faded photograph, a blurred video. I pulled Marla and Lila aside. "Do you see him?" I whispered. Marla looked. "Yeah, I see. Like something from the old mirror." Lila stayed quiet, but her eyes flicked rapidly. Something else was ripping out from the light inside the man's jack-o'-lantern. Not as bright as usual, but a dark streak running through it, like a view through shadow. And for a moment I saw in its reflection the tall, thin silhouette, the slightly tilted head. Exactly the suited man I'd seen in the mirror at the Whitaker house. I stepped forward. The man spoke, slow, as if drawing from long-held breath. "You're Ethan, aren't you? The new bearer?" I said nothing. My name was spoken by a voice that didn't need him to know me, because something in me reflected it, making him recognise. "You know about us?" I asked. He smiled, a smile with no warmth. "I was before. I brought. I thought renaming, changing the light would be the way out. They changed. They didn't end it. They taught me the new phrase. Now they want it back." He gestured toward them. Jack-o'-lantern, its interior light flickered. "But I'm not here to take it back. Yet. I'm here to make you understand. Who brings the next one? That's the key. You can think you act, but how do you bring yourself without being drawn?" Marla stood behind me, her hand curled inward. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He shook his head. "My name has been called many times, then changed. Maybe you know me as Garrett Ames, the one who investigated the Whitaker house before disappearing from official record. People say I went missing. I didn't disappear. I was held. I'm something between the bringer and the brought. I tried to change it. I tried to make it a new contract. I renamed, and now it tells me, bring to me. So I remember what you gave. But I don't want to be prey again. I want someone else to bring, because if not, whoever brings will carry me back." I heard something beneath his words, a shaped desperation, a sensation stretched across time. "What do you want from us?" Garrett gave a smile both sad and sly. "I need another piece. I've been stuck between self-bringing loops. It remembers my name, but it won't leave me be. If you and that girl bring, truly bring, voluntarily, not forced into the cycle, I'll give you a clue to force something to give back. Part of Lila. Freedom that isn't half-measured. In exchange, I take part of..." "Marla," I gave a bitter laugh. "That's another trap." He nodded. "Everything is a trap. You stubbornly think you have choice. I know the light in you. I see it whenever your jack-o'-lanterns glow. It sways like a fragment healing. If you bring because you're called, that's one thing. If you bring because you voluntarily place your piece there, the chain shifts again, and part of me will be pulled from the crack. But I'm not the voluntary bringer. I've been brought too many times. I just want to hear that thing. Who brings next? Lila tilted her head. You're an old bearer. Garrett extended his hand, not touching, just holding the air. What's been brought doesn't fully leave. Some stays in the light, some in the name. I am its echo, and now it wants completion. It wants to take back those who gave to it. Do you know what that means, Ethan? If it takes Marla back, it takes the piece it released to her. She won't be herself. Something else will fill. And if that something else is strong enough, the next one won't have to bring themselves. It will already know who to complete it. I thought of Lila, the only one almost unhooked. She no longer heard the old echo, but the question looming for the coming Halloween remained. Who brings next? If Garrett were allowed to take back, who knows whose dreams that question would plant? This time the other wouldn't have the strength to resist. We changed the terms once, I said. We're not doing another trap. Garrett stepped back, his eyes sinking under the light of the lantern. Not a trap. An offer. You can refuse. But remember, when you refuse, it still asks. It still waits. And it will find someone willing to bring themselves because they think it's the way to save her. Then he was gone. Not running, but dissolving like thin smoke passing through, leaving the smell of damp burnt wood and a cold trace in the air. Only distant children's laughter echoed, and the light in his jack-o'-lantern flickered once, then went out completely. Lila turned to me softer. It's not asking anymore. It's watching. It sees the bringers, the old bearer. He was carried too. Marla let out a strained laugh. I remember that moment when he stood there, eyes looking through me. Something inside me wanted to scream, "Don't do it." I knew what had to be done. Not let Garrett take Marla's piece in exchange for a vague promise. Not let anyone bring themselves in the way that thing could latch on. We needed a decision maker. Someone brings, but in a way not manipulated. A collective choice. Naming it, lighting the fire, locking it, not allowing old claimants to reclaim by old means. I pulled out the Whitaker notebook. On the last page, words appeared gradually. Not ink, but written in the air itself. Who brings will bear, who names has voice, who knows has right. We won't let it ask anymore, I said. We will set it. We'll give Lila true freedom, but it will cost. No one else will be carried unknowingly, and if Garrett wants out, he has to bring a piece in place of the one he was held by. Marla looked at me, something like light flickered back in her eyes. I don't want to lose more, but I will bring. I will name. I will hold the name. I won't let it take that piece back. Lila gripped my hand. You bring. But who's next? The question hung. Not as a cold prompt anymore. It was a challenge. If we did this, who would be the next one in the self-selecting chain? We turned our backs on the festival, carrying the sense that something was changing how it viewed things. Not just a pulled loop anymore, but a new multiplayer field with rules, where each person must decide. Name, bring, or be brought. The consequences of the renaming didn't come all at once. It was like a crack spreading through water. At first just a fine line, then layers shifting, ripples, and then things that couldn't be completely undone. Marla began losing pieces of memory. Not everything, but enough to leave her stumbling between remembering and not. One morning she told me, I remember when I was little, my mother taught me how to bake, but the name of the cake is gone. What am I even eating? Then a moment later, choose who? And she flinched, as if pulled out of some other dream. She wasn't even sure anymore why she first came to me. She said that parts of her old stories felt worn away, replaced by another echo, like a prompt. Who brings the next one? Lila seemed lighter. She smiled more often, and her nights weren't weighed down by those oppressive shadows like before. But whenever Halloween approached, she would jolt awake, whispering, "Who brings the next one?" Not as a question, but as if listening to an echo waiting for an answer. I began to feel it in myself. That echo had shifted from "who will be chosen" into a hanging question. An unspoken burden settled on the shoulders. Who will bring themselves? Then someone came, not a new victim, in the way we had assumed. He was a middle-aged man appearing in the middle of the town's Halloween festivities, an evening when suburbs glittered with jack-o'-lanterns, kids chattered going door to door, and houses glowed orange. He was selling hand-carved pumpkins at the corner of a small park. His table displayed small lanterns, with faces unlike anyone's, odd light flickering from within. His gaze didn't settle on anyone. But when I passed, a sensation like being noted washed over me. Something ancient, very old, as if I had seen this man before, in a faded photograph, a blurred video. I pulled Marla and Lila aside. "Do you see him?" I whispered. Marla looked. "Yeah, I see, like something from the old mirror." Lila stayed silent, but her eyes darted quickly. Something else was tearing out from the light in the man's jack-o'-lantern. Not bright in the usual way, but a dark streak running through it, like a gaze through shadow. And for a second I saw in its reflection the tall, thin silhouette, the slightly tilted head, exactly the suited man I'd seen in the Whitaker house mirror. I stepped forward. The man spoke, slow, as if drawing from long-held breath. "You're Ethan, aren't you? The new bearer?" I didn't answer. My name was spoken by a voice that didn't need him to know me, because something in me reflected it, making him recognise. "You know about us?" I asked. He smiled, a smile with no warmth. "I was before. I brought. I thought renaming, changing the light would be the way out. They changed, they didn't end it. They taught me the new phrase, now they want it back." He pointed to the jack-o'-lantern. Its interior light flickered. "But I'm not here to take it back. Right away. I'm here to make you understand. Who brings the next one? That's the key. You can think you act. But how do you bring yourself without being drawn?" Marla stood behind me, her hand curled inward. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He shook his head. "My name's been called many times, then altered. Maybe you know me as Garrett Ames, the one who investigated the Whitaker house before vanishing from official record. People say I disappeared. I didn't disappear. I was held. I'm something between bringer and brought. I tried to change it. I tried to make it a new contract. I renamed, and now it tells me, bring to me, so I remember what you gave. But I don't want to be prey again. I want someone else to bring, because if not, whoever brings will carry me back." I heard something under his words, a shaped despair, a feeling stretched across time. "What do you want from us?" Garrett offered a smile that was part sadness, part calculation. "I need another piece. I've been stuck in loops of bringing. It remembers my name, but it won't leave me. If you and that girl bring, truly bring, voluntarily, not forced into the cycle, I'll give you a clue to force something to give back, part of Lila. Freedom that isn't compromised. In exchange, I take part of..." "Marla," I scoffed. "That's another trap." He nodded. "Everything's a trap. You stubbornly think you have choice. I see the light in you. I see it every time your jack-o'-lantern glows. It sways like a healing fragment. If you bring because you're called, that's one thing. If you bring because you deliberately place your piece, the chain shifts again, and a part of me will be pulled from the crack. But I'm not the voluntary bringer. I've been brought too many times. I just want to hear it. Who brings next?" Lila tilted her head. You're an old bearer. Garrett extended his hand. No touch, just holding the air. What's been brought doesn't entirely leave. Some remains in the light, some in the name. I am its echo. And now it wants completion. It wants to take back those who gave to it. Do you know what that means, Ethan? If it takes Marla back, it takes the peace it released to her. She won't be herself. Something else will fill. And if that something else is strong enough, the next one won't have to bring themselves. It will already know who to complete it. I thought of Lila, the only one almost unhooked. She didn't hear the old echo anymore. But the question looming for the coming Halloween remained. Who brings next? If Garrett were allowed to take back, who knew whose dreams that question would plant? This time the other might not even have the strength to resist. We changed the terms once, I said. We're not doing another trap. Garrett stepped back, his eyes sinking beneath the lantern's glow. Not a trap. An offer. You can refuse. But remember, when you refuse, it still asks, it still waits. And it will find someone willing to bring themselves because they think that's how to save her. Then he was gone. Not running, but dissipating like thin smoke passing through, leaving the scent of damp burned wood and a cold trace in the air. Only distant children's laughter echoed, and the light in his jack-o'-lantern flickered once, then went out completely. Lila turned to me softer. It's not asking anymore. It's watching. It sees who brings. The old bearer. He was brought too. Marla let out a strained laugh. I remember that moment when he stood there, eyes looking through me. Something inside me wanted to scream, "Don't do it." I knew what had to be done. Not let Garrett take Marla's piece in exchange for a vague promise. Not let anyone bring themselves in the way that thing could latch on. We needed a decision. Who brings, but in a way not manipulated. A collective choice, naming it, lighting the fire, locking it. Not allowing old claimants to reclaim by old means. I pulled out the Whitaker notebook. On the last page, words appeared gradually. Not ink, but formed from the air itself. Who brings one will bear. Who names has voice. Who knows has right. We won't let it ask anymore, I said. We'll set it. We'll give Lila true freedom, but it will cost. No one else will be carried unknowingly. And if Garrett wants out, he has to bring a piece in place of the one he was held by. Marla looked at me, something like light flickered back in her eyes. I don't want to lose more, but I will bring. I will name. I will keep the name. I won't let it take that piece back. Lila gripped my hand. You bring. But who's next? The question hung. Not the cold prompt anymore. It was a challenge. If we did this, who would be the next in the self-selecting chain? We turned away from the festival, carrying the sense that something was changing how it perceived. No longer just a pulled loop, but a new multiplayer field with rules, in which each person must decide, name, bring, or be brought. After the night on the Firehill, the silence did not mean peace. It thickened, like a thin membrane stretched between moments, trembling whenever someone mentioned Halloween with a different tone, a whisper not coming from far away but seeming to come from inside my own head. Who keeps the promise? Lila changed the most. She went back to school, trying to live like a normal child, playing with friends, drawing, telling stories about the neighbour's cat. But something threaded through those words, something that made listeners lower their voices unconsciously. She started telling her classmates stories about what she had to do, not in a coercive way, but as a reminder. Don't forget to keep the promise. Who keeps the promise? Once she drew a picture in class. In the middle of the classroom, a circle with 3 people. A man, a woman, a little girl, standing next to a large lantern. Behind them a low, fading shadow, and in the corner a faintly drawn other face looking out, with eyes like deep hollows. She explained, "That's the old keeper. It's watching to see if we remember." The teacher smiled, nodded, saw nothing odd. When I looked at the picture she gave me after school, saw in it a silent plea. Lila's eyes weren't looking at the viewer so much as transmitting a wordless question. Who keeps the promise? On the nights Lila slept, I heard the whispering in her head like wind passing. No longer the call of who brings, but the repeated affirmation. We keep. The old keeper knows. Don't let it forget. She woke as if having just finished a negotiation, sometimes breaking into old melodies she didn't know where she'd learned, then looking at me and whispering, You remember, right? You keep. Marla was different. She began losing fewer of the internal gaps. Not everything, some childhood memories remained like coarse threads, but most of the pieces that had once felt awkward were now overlaid with a different dialogue beneath. She would ask, What's the name of that cake? Then answer herself in a strange voice. I remember. I keep. Choose who brings. Then she would laugh, then pause, eyes unfocused, as if listening to a conversation only she controlled. Sometimes I'd hear her murmur in the night. Its name. I gave it. I keep. No one takes it back. Then she'd shake her head, silent, denying that other voice that surfaced now and then. I, who had thought myself an intermediary, became the recorder. The mark under my ribs didn't go away. It grew heavier whenever I saw jack-o'-lanterns light up outside, like they sent back a very light touch, a confirmation. You brought, you keep. Halloween remembers. And there was something new. An appearance behind the old shadow. It was the lower, blurred figure I'd seen the night of the festival on the hill, a shape not quite full, standing outside direct sight, but always at the edge. Whenever I turned, it was just out of clarity. When I tried to study it, it would recede like a dark smear in mist. I knew it was watching. Garrett reappeared, this time not as faded. He came one afternoon to the old cafe in town, sat across from me, his hand trembling slightly around his cup. It isn't quiet, he whispered as soon as I sat. The old keeper isn't relenting. It sees. It's rewinding what we called by the new name. There's someone behind pulling. Not me. The lower shadow? I asked. Not a shadow, Garrett replied. It's something that doesn't want a new name. It's something before we named it. It sees the new law, self-bring, self-keep, as an affront. It's testing ways to make people forget that their name was called. It's dredging up the old ones, making them think they can go back to the old way, sowing doubt. Tonight, something will happen. The Samhain festival at the river's edge, where they rekindle the old fire. They'll light the traditional pyre, unaware that that focus acts like a funnel. It wants to use that fire to break what we named. It doesn't want an end, it wants to revert. If we do nothing, the new name will be pulled away like old cloth, and it will ask again, who chooses who, instead of who brings. I looked down at my hand, the trace under the skin, a hairline crack. We changed part of it. Is there a way to avoid it? Garrett smiled thinly. It has a way. It invites the old ones, shows them a piece escaped. Those who were once brought, renamed. It plants the idea, if you undo the new naming, you can free yourself. And from that, they bring again themselves, not knowing they're helping it rewind the old loop. Lila appeared at the cafe door, as if she'd heard the whole thing. She walked over, put her hand on the table, looked straight at me, and whispered, Who keeps the promise? It's coming. It wants to forget the name. We knew. The event on the hill. The town's Samhain festival, where they relit the old fire, where people believed they were invoking a new autumn, would be the focal point. All the concentrated lights there would amplify a presence. If the old keeper wasn't properly named, if that lower figure, the dissenter of the new law, reintegrated old rites, it would have a chance to restore the choose who loop by erasing the boundary between self-bring and being called. We decided to act, not by blocking the fire, because forbidding it would only drive it underground, but by putting the new name of the old keeper forward. We would stage a counter-ritual just before the official Samhain pyre, a parallel thread of self-bring, self-keep, confronting the old phrase, so anyone near the fire would sense it, not by sound but by feeling. Preparation wasn't simple. We brought others in, Evelyn, a few people who'd had vague experiences with Whitaker, House, and a young woman who was the granddaughter of someone Garrett had investigated years before. They didn't know all the detailed explanation, but they understood the sensation of things that don't leave. We told them about naming and keeping the promise as a revived rite. Each carried a symbolic object, offered a small vow to the fire they couldn't fully see, reconnecting the new circle publicly, making forgetting the name harder. That night, cold wind poured down from the woods like a grey current. People gathered around the Samhain fire on the riverbank meadow, small jack-o'-lantern lights arranged in rows, blinking, forming a path leading up the hill. Children's laughter echoed, folk music mingled with faint whistles, and elders repeated autumn stories under the moon. Off to the side, we formed our own circle, a small mirror reflecting firelight, a stone inscribed with the name Old Keeper, placed on the ash. Our 3 tokens, my necklace, Marla's laughter, Lila's memory piece, laid beside, and Evelyn whispering affirmations. Self-bring, self-keep, who keeps the promise. When the fire was officially lit by the mayor, in full traditional ceremony, the autumn invocation, the flames rising, there was a moment when something in the air jerked. The jack-o'-lanterns around it first flickered as usual, then simultaneously flashed in a beat. Not warm light, but a pale blue blink, like a response. From behind that lower figure appeared, clearer than before, standing outside the circle but visible, root-like veins shimmering, eyes closed but watching, and behind it a residual oscillation of choose who seemed to try to slip in. Lila went still. She choked out, "Who keeps the promise?" This time not a whisper. Her voice cut through the crowd. The question echoed like a projection, and for a moment the lower figure, whether the old keeper or its dissenter, I still couldn't tell, shivered. A sound, not words, spread like a layer of air being redrawn. The name is known. What's been placed? Then, within the big fire, a dense dark smoke rose, wrapping around that lower figure like a cloak being thrown over. It did not vanish. It contracted, and its eyes, typically unseen, flickered faintly, then stilled. But it wasn't peace. Something else answered. The old whisper was dragged back, raw. "Choose who?" Shortened as if torn. The crowd didn't hear it. They only sensed an unusual stillness. Garrett stood behind me, pale. "It's testing," he said. "It wants to see if the new name holds. If not, it will seed others with the idea of undoing it." A child in the crowd, unaware, picked up a small jack-o'-lantern and waved it. Its light abruptly turned brighter yellow, and in the faint reflection on its carved face, I saw an image. A middle-aged woman, the grandmother of the young woman with us, looking down, eyes wide, mouth opening as if trying to speak. Then the image dissolved. The girl cried out, "Grandma!" It was a sign. Something wasn't entirely restrained. It saw the new name but still sought to slip through gaps, through memory, through images, by suggesting to those once carried that they might correct things. I felt the whisper again. No voice, just a sensation. Who brings next? But around it was a new movement, a reaction from those standing on the outer ring. They didn't hear clearly, but someone in the crowd gently placed a hand on another's shoulder and said, "Look closely. Something's different. Don't let it come back." That night closed with an ambiguity. The lower figure didn't disappear, but it was quieter. The old keeper seemed to bow, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. The new law wasn't broken, but the dissenter sent a message. It wouldn't stop. It would listen, probe, and wait. Lila went home, lay quietly in bed and whispered, Who keeps the promise? And as if in answer, a small voice, almost her own but deeper, echoed in her head. We do. The old keeper knows. Don't let it forget. Marla sat across from me, hand trembling, reaching for my necklace on the table. I remember part, she said. But sometimes I feel a shadow behind me whispering, do it again. Rename the old. I reply, self-bring, self-keep. But it hears. It hasn't gone. I looked at the cooled ash. The name called didn't erase everything. It only added another layer to the chain. And out there in the quiet, that other shadow still stood. Not intervening directly, but with intent. If in the end we named something else, it would find a way to bring back the old. That night, when everything seemed to settle into a heavy quiet after the chaos on Samhoin Hill, I sat in my study, cramped, littered with tangled cables, dust-covered mics and old notebooks, looking at the endlessly long audio file, fragments of the self-bring, self-keep ritual, Lila's whispering, Marla's warped voice tangled with the old keeper being named, and the silences where that lower shadow tried to edge in. I thought about the original promise. Tell the story. Explain. Warn. But now I knew. Telling it opened another door. Many would hear. Many would bring themselves. And whatever was watching could exploit that sharing to twist it back toward the old shape. Marla came in carrying a cold coffee, swinging her hand. What are you going to do with the podcast, Ethan? She sat, touched the stack of recordings. If you put it out raw, it won't just be curious town folks listening. It will spread. Whoever listens without knowing will think, yeah, I'll bring myself. It's just a story. Then they bring. Then it learns again. I nodded. If I leave it alone, someone else will. They'll hear the old voice in dreams. They'll bring themselves without knowing whether they were called or choosing. The new name, the old keeper, needs to live intentionally in the public space. So if someone tries to revert to choose who, there's counterweight. Another voice, another law they've heard. Lila sat on the floor, pressing her small fingers against the drawing she made at school. The circle, 3 figures, the low shadow. She turned back, eyes no longer entirely childish. Who keeps the promise? The phrase no longer rang like a plea or a challenge. It was a simple offering. I asked, what do you want, Lila? She said, I don't want anyone left behind. I want them to know, but if everyone knows, if someone brings themselves, who keeps it? The old keeper. It sees. We decided. Tell it, but controlled. Not just drop the file online. I would do a narrated piece. Not a how-to, not detailing the mechanics of the ritual, not teaching anyone how to do it again, but giving context, laying out the new name, offering the prompt, who keeps the promise? As reassurance, as assertion. Whoever brings themselves does so knowingly. Whoever keeps must act. And there is a parallel law. At the same time, if that lower shadow wanted to intervene, it would have to contend with a warned community, with a name to call back. The next day I called Evelyn, Garrett, and a few others, the small circle we had brought in for defence. We recorded a joint narrative, my voice framing it, Evelyn giving the history and how the original covenant was made, Marla speaking about the cost, erased pieces of memory and how she held on to the laughter, and Lila reading her questions succinctly. Who keeps the promise? Garrett stayed silent, only nodding, watching that low shadow as if he felt it stalking outside the window. We didn't close off every avenue, but we laid out 3 things clearly. Self-bring is a conscious choice. Not being called, not being pulled. Whoever brings their piece knows they are doing it. Self-keep is responsibility. Whoever keeps the promise doesn't just say it. They act. Name it. Repeat it. Counterbalance the old. Who keeps the promise? Ceased to be only Lila's private question. It became the closing prompt. Whenever it's heard, remember, there is another law, another name watching, and there are consenting people. We aired that episode on Halloween night, not as lurid warning, but as a hushed reading. Some listened through the local app, some downloaded it. Some shared it not to do it again, but to stay alert. At first, nothing happened. Then unexpectedly, feedback came. A string of messages from people with indirect connections to Whittaker House. A young woman in the next town said she dreamed that night of a new, different circle of fire. In the dream, 3 figures stood and said, "We know. We keep." An old man who had seen the low shadow in his garden shouted to his grandson, "Last night the shadow didn't choose who anymore. It looked around, named things. It fell silent when I asked. It bowed." But not all was well. Some listeners misinterpreted. If I self-bring, I can choose who brings next. A few curious people went to Whittaker House on their own, attempting clumsy versions of the rite. No Samoan fire, no naming counterweight. And in the following week, strange jack-o'-lanterns appeared on old houses, their light shifting, warped, as if reflecting that low shadow. I felt something change in the corner of my eye. The old vibrations of choose who hadn't entirely vanished. It was trying to seep back through the gaps those half-formed self-brings left. The lower shadow, old keeper or dissenter, or both merged beyond clear separation, began to respond. It no longer appeared outright. It sent signals through the dreams of those clumsily self-bringing, seeding into their minds a possibility. You could pull it back, you could forget the new name, just doubt, just ask. An old acquaintance of Garrett's called him trembling. I dreamed the old circle, the choose who. It whispered, if they know, they'll self-bring. If they self-bring, they'll break it, make them doubt. Lila began hearing a different thread mixed in, no longer simply who keeps the promise, but a tugging, brief call slithering through cracks. Old name, choose who, choose who. She startled awake in the night, eyes wide. It wants to forget the name. It told me I could do it wrong. I held her, whispering, remember, self-bring, self-keep. The old keeper knows the name. Garrett arrived with a new plan. We reinforce, not by silence but by repetition. Promise keepers won't be one, they'll be many. They won't just hear, they'll speak it back. Each time someone self-brings, they publicly name their part, so no one can twist it with doubt. The lower shadow can suggest suspicion, but it can't erase a name that many have recorded simultaneously. We held a small reaffirmation at Whittaker House. Past participants, including the granddaughter of the woman in that photo, an elderly couple who had once felt echoes, and a few strangers who'd heard the podcast, came, each bringing a small personal object, spoke aloud, self-bring, self-keep, who keeps the promise, and inscribed it by hand into a new book, then placed a sliver of their light, a laugh, a memory, a charm, into a carved box labelled the Keeper's Box. The ritual didn't produce a dramatic, immediate rupture. The lower shadow turned away, seemingly unable to intervene directly, while so many names acted in concert. Lila no longer heard the vague tug of choose who for several nights. Only the prompt remained. Who keeps the promise? Now answered in echo by others. We do. The old keeper knows. It won't forget. But I knew it wasn't final. The lower shadow hadn't been erased. It had only retreated, watching, probing for a weakness. One night as I replayed the episode, I heard in the background, a tiny thing not in the main file but embedded in a listener's reply, a colder whisper I'd never heard before. The new name will carry. The old name will return. Who brings next? Ask yourself, did you call it? I understood. It was trying to inject doubt into the very act of self-bringing, making the bringer believe they'd been fooled, that self-bring was just a variant of being called, and if they retreated, the new name would soften and the old would creep back in. The story didn't end there. Another night Lila came to me, eyes glazed. Do you hear? It doesn't ask anymore. It says, if someone brings, someone else keeps, but someone new is rewriting it. I looked out the window. Outside, the jack-o'-lanterns in the neighbour's yard glowed, normally warm, but at the edge a small pale blue flicker, like an old trace, blinked. In the corner of vision, that lower shadow appeared for a moment, not standing where before but closer, less a translucent presence than a marginal reflection in a glass pane. "We have to keep going," I said. "The new law can't sit quiet. We have to teach others to speak the name. We have to hold the circle." Marla nodded. "I'm scared. I can feel my memories wobble every time someone questions. I'll say it. I won't let it make me doubt." Garrett turned his back to the door, eyes cast toward the floor. "It's not just resisting. It's building. It plants questions so someone drops out. If someone slips, it will come back and ask again. Who chooses who?